Fairfield, I'll call this meeting of the Fairfield Public School Board of Education to order for August 28th, 2018. Present is Ms. Pitko, Ms. Leeper, Mrs. Vitale, Mrs. Gerber, myself, Philip Dwyer, Mrs. Jacobson, Mr. Acer, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly, and Mr. Peterson. I'll ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and if you would stay standing for a moment. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you could stay standing for a moment. Normally we will acknowledge the passing of a community leader with a moment of silence, but in this case we have a national leader in John McCain, who passed away recently and who has been known throughout this country for his service to the country and his care for human beings. So I thought it would be appropriate to take a moment of silence in remembrance of John McCain. Thank you very much. So we start our meetings with public comment on agenda items only. And so if there's any member of the public who would like to come forward to talk, we do limit you to 3 minutes. Most people are able to get their comment in within that time period. So just come forward and sit at the table and speak into the microphone. Give us your name and address. Anybody wishes to come forward? Seeing none, we'll go on, right on to old business. Update graduation policy. Is that...
I didn't have an update. I didn't put that on the agenda.
We put it on the agenda because we knew you had a policy committee meeting and we weren't sure whether there would be some update needed. So if there is no update needed, we'll
I can
move
just
right
update you on our expected timeline. I assume this was from central office, sorry. So what we're looking at with some of the language that we're considering and some of the conversations we need to have with staff, the current timeline we're guessing on for this, we're hoping at our first meeting in October that we're coming with coffee and staying and hashing that one out. I believe at our first October meeting, we will be able to vote it out of committee. So it would be the first board meeting in October that you'd be seeing it for a first, and it will be a first read. I don't know if there are any questions.
And then presumably if all goes well, a second reading, if there's not substantial changes, would happen at the
Second
next regular
meeting, that's correct.
Okay. Any questions on high school graduation policy? Yes, Ms. Leeper.
Chair to Ms. Maxon Kennelly. If we're still interested in an edit, for example, personal finance, what's the best mechanism to continue to discuss that?
I guess I would suggest that you follow the avenue that Mr. Dwyer and Mr. Asa did, which is they had a topic of interest to them. They met with Dr. Jones and staff members who were relevant to their specific topic, because the first thing that the committee would ask is, how does staff feel about that? How workable does staff feel that that is? That would be our first question. So I would suggest that you go to there, and then whatever suggested language you have, get it to me, and I'll bring it to the committee for consideration and go from there.
Thank you.
And our topic was community service, which I think there's an amenability, that's not a word, to trying to find a way to get that into the high school graduation policy. So it is moving forward in terms of discussion. Anything else on high school graduation policy? Nope. Okay, on to item B. As you know, with this list of ideas, we ended up at our June meeting with 4 issues still on the table. The magnet program, ECC requirements in the future, the Walter Fitzgerald campus in the future, and redistricting. All 4 of those are contained within the discussion of board goals, but I didn't want to just ignore where we ended up. And so I put that agenda item on in the event that board members would want to make specific comments about those 4 issues. And if there are none, and you want to just have your comments discussed within the context of board goals, we just move on to board goals. So first, let me see, is there anybody that wishes to make a comment on either magnet program, ECC, Walter Fitzgerald, or redistricting? Mrs. Gerber, followed by Ms. Leeper.
Well, I just had a question about the memo, because this is the topic right now, the discussion on structural change ideas, enclosure number 1.
Well, the topic is the 4 remaining issues, is what the topic actually is.
Discussion of structural change ideas.
The 4 remaining issues that are on the table, which were
Right.
outlined in the memo, but the first 2 issues, the memo said the board has agreed not to continue discussion on that, so I think the only purpose of the memo was to say magnet, ECC, Walter Fitzgerald, and redistricting remain the 4 outstanding issues that the board still has to resolve.
Okay, well, I guess one question I had, because I do think that this listing of the schools paired up and everything did cause a certain amount of consternation with the public. I was just curious, who put together this chart with the elementary schools paired up?
The central office.
So Dr. Jones did that?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that.
I don't know who in the central office, but it's the central office.
I think it comes out of the questions that were asked at the last meeting, which, we went round and round, lots of circles. For us to do an in-depth study of any of that would have been very, very expensive. This gives you a basic idea of 2 buildings that are next door to each other. That's about the depth of the analysis. And if you actually just looked at all of your first graders, all of your second graders, how many sections would we have needed with our current numbers last year? That's it. And it would have saved 20 sections. On top of that, now you'd have to go back in and say, but how many buses would it take to go with a structure like that? So let's say you need 11 buses. So by the time you factor some of those basic things in, it lets people know you might be looking at 600, 700,000, or it could be less, could be slightly more, but it's not a significant amount to actually upheaval the entire school district, which is what the discussion was last time. So I looked at it as we had put it to rest, but tried to put more depth behind what we had talked about last time.
Okay, well, I guess my only concern is just the fact that, it does specifically say we'd save 20 sections. I just don't want that to then become something that's held up against the Board of Ed, well, you could have saved 20 sections, because I think it's also important to note, and I know you mentioned 11 buses perhaps, maybe it would be more, maybe less, but, this impacts the CLC, student transitions. There would have to be some sort of redistricting on the middle school level, it looks like. So I just think it would be helpful moving forward if and when it does happen that we are asked about this, that we could also say, yes, based on those numbers on a very basic breakout, there would be a savings of 20 sections. However, there are also considerable costs that were not factored into this. And I don't know if you feel comfortable giving kind of just a rounded number just to say, but that's just something that I just thought might be helpful.
Yeah, and I guess in reviewing the memo, we felt like the paragraph below, operational issues such as transportation, and it goes into all of that, would have to be considered. And, and it ends by basically saying that the board is going to confirm tonight that we're not doing this. So I hope we're not going to discuss this for 45 minutes, to be honest.
Don't have any interest in discussing it at any length. I just wanted to clarify where this chart came from.
Yeah, they're based on actual numbers.
So these 2 issues are off the table in terms of further discussion, and the only issues that are still on the table that are part of this agenda item is the magnet program, ECC, Walter Fitzgerald, and redistricting. Any comments on those 4 issues? Mr. Ace?
I'd like some clarification as what it means at the August meeting to eliminate grade configuration as an option. I specifically asked in June that it be removed from the thing. It was stated in the minutes. You confirmed, and we said that it was done. However, it's on the agenda in an enclosure again tonight. So what do we have to do as a board to follow the last sentence of number 1? The board decided to confirm at its August meeting to eliminate. What do we have to do so this keeps showing up, as Dr. Jones has said?
Approve a set of goals that do not include those first 2 items. Robert's rules is very clear. You don't write motions in the negative. You don't pass a motion that says we're not going to do something. You pass a motion that says we're going to do something. And so the intent of that sentence was to say in August, when we confirm these are the areas that we're going to continue to explore, and let's use this at the at the moment, Magnet, ECC, Walter Fitzgerald, and redistricting. Once we pass a goal that says those are the only 4 items moving forward, everything else falls off the table. Is how you would technically do it with Robert's rules. Does that answer your question?
Not really.
Well, okay.
Just
Jackson Kennelly.
to follow up on that, my understanding from Mr. Dwyer to Mr. Asa's point is that putting B on there was done knowing that C was there. So it was the idea that this is being paired with the discussion of board goals. There's a bit of an assumption, which I think is a fairly good one, that we will need to address some kind of direction with those other 4 items that would probably be captured in the board goals, setting our agenda and topics for the year ahead. So the action Mr. Asa is asking for was anticipated would happen with number 4C that is on our agenda.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any comments on the 4 areas that are still open for discussion? Because these are the only 4 items from the original structural change list of 65 items that remain under consideration by this board based on the June meeting. Ms. Leeper, followed by Ms. Pitko.
Just, I guess a point of clarity. I'm wondering if under the magnet program discussion, we would also be able to, down the road, add a discussion of a potential math and science academy in lieu of, or have an opportunity to discuss an idea like that. Is that?
Within the memo, we said these are the 2 ideas that surfaced in June, but board members were encouraged to add a 3rd idea. And so if you wanted to say, let's add Math and Science Academy to it, when we pass in the goals discussion a goal that says, let's investigate a magnet program, that would be a 3rd item to look at,
Thank you.
provided the board votes yes. Ms. Pitko.
Can I ask a clarifying question through the chair to Mrs. Leeper? Is that different than the STEAM program, which is science, technology, engineering, arts, and math? You're looking for a different program than that?
So my understanding of more of an academy rather than a magnet type program would be actually, it could be something more aligned with a gifted and talented type of program for students who are excelling and would choose to have a deeper, more thorough academy to pursue that specific interest. But I don't have this all fleshed out, which is why I only asked to put it on to talk about it.
All you need,
Yes, separate than STEAM.
all you need is a topic idea. We can flesh it out later.
Can I ask my original question?
Please, whatever it was.
It's just a clarifying question. You're asking us if we have any comments about this, but you're saying we're going to talk about it in our board goals. So should I save my comments about that for board goals?
It's the pleasure of the board what they wanted to do. So yes, you could save it or you could express it now.
I'll go through each one with you.
Okay. Any other final comments on these 4 items? If not, these 4 items are part of the goals discussion and we can come back to them. I have one last comment, Mrs. Maxon-Canal.
I've had something I was hoping to start off with on board goals, and based on what I was going to propose to the board, I was going to ask through the chair to Mrs. Pitko if she wouldn't mind actually talking about these 4 items, or to a degree, because based on what I'm going to propose to the board, it's going to be a rather brief goals discussion. Now, the board may decide to
Yeah,
not do
your
what I'm
concept.
suggesting,
Yeah,
but
your concept.
if it did go with my proposal, then that would shortchange the conversation you're looking to have, so.
So what's your desire? You can do it next time. What's your desire? You don't have to do it if you don't wish, if you're not ready.
My blanket comment is, I need to understand the timeline for these issues. Okay, let's start there. Because I feel like we keep discussing the same topics over and over again without any raw data, program implementation. To me, this is like a paragraph for each one on a page, but we keep talking about them. So if we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty, I know that some people on this board have gone on a tour of the ECC in the Walter Fitzgerald campus. Some are going on a tour. This is really loud, by the way. I need more of a timeline to understand how we're going to address all of this, because I have a lot of questions on each one of them.
So I would not make it up on the fly, but I would say this. The lease for the Walter Fitzgerald campus comes up in the spring of 19. So I think that this board would have to engage in conversation about what they want to do with Walter Fitzgerald in time to have made that decision, so that if there's, let's say it takes a year to get it relocated, we know we're just trying to sign a one-year lease than a multi-10-year lease. So I would think that that conversation would have to happen this school year with a conclusion,
Now.
like starting now and a
Yes.
conclusion in,
October.
so, I think magnet program is part of our report to the state, which has to happen next spring as well. So I think the adequate study of 3 different program ideas, testing them out to see whether there's interest on the part of the public, and is there space requirements and all the rest. So I would think that would be a year-long study and make a decision again next spring. Redistricting, I think, is in the same ballpark, that it has to be reported to the state what our interest is. So, so that would probably have to happen between now and next spring. ECC, the pressure that we're under is that we're getting more and more enrollees in that program, and so we had to put one class in Stratford, maybe next, Stratfield. We may need to put another class somewhere, depending on enrollment, and so we ought to be preparing for that, but I don't think we're under any specific timetable on ECC. That's the best I could do in terms of time frame, in terms of the need to start addressing these. Is that, it's best I can do. Yeah,
Let me just a clarifying question. So we have these on here to examine, to ask questions, but we don't have a real timeline of outside of the racial imbalance plan that we have to bring to the state as to what we're going to do. The Walter Fitzgerald campus being the one that has the most pressing issue, I'm assuming that means that at our September 25th meeting, we're going to discuss this in depth because we have to decide whether or not we're going to renew the lease.
We don't have to decide that in September.
Okay.
Mrs. Gerber?
Well, first, just to piggyback on that, when do we have to decide? I mean, at what point, if the lease is up in June of 2019, when's the latest possible time?
Now, really. It's, I mean, you see Mr. Collins shaking
So
his
it is
head.
now, then?
In my, I will say my intent, and staff are doing a lot of work on this right now for WFC, for ECC, even for the magnet program. I would hope that September and October we're presenting to you, getting further questions, further probing, what else you want us to look at. Everyone will have already toured WFC, so you'll have good background. Mr. Collins working on all of the financial aspects, so.
So you're
I think
answering my
staff will be
question.
ready.
September 25th, you're going to give us information about at least 3 of these topics, or 2 of the topics, Walter Fitzgerald and ECC.
We haven't mapped out those agendas September, October. It's got to be quick because we only had the leases up at the end of this year. They are waiting for us to sign a lease right now, and they're not going to be happy with the 1-year lease anyway, if that is what this board, directs us to do. Generally, we sign a 3-year lease with the extension, with a 2-year extension. So we need to make a decision because otherwise we can't run that risk for WFC to not have a space.
Let me get to Mr. Asa, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly. Did you have your hands up?
She's not done.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So just to go back then, so seeing as we are on a rather tight timeline, I guess one question I would have is, have the Walter Fitzgerald and ECC communities been notified?
We had this discussion when we toured the other day, WFC and the ECC. We're starting with the board first, because if I'd gone to the community first, this board would have said, why did you go to the community before you went to the board? So we've started with the board. We're working right now with the staff. We're working with the community. You see Mr. Mancuso nodding his head. We're working through all of that right now. And
So they will
yes,
be
absolutely.
notified?
Yes.
Because obviously that might.
Well, and I would say not even notified, but included, in a conversation, really trying to
Right, well,
gather
just
their
been
input.
given a heads
Right.
up.
Did I answer your question? Which of the 3 of you went in order, whatever?
Me and then me.
Okay, so Dr. Jones answered the question that I had regarding this, so obviously this is a pressing issue, so it will be on a future agenda. I was under the assumption in June that we were going to assign dates to these things, and we had started working on that. Can you comment, Dr. Jones, on just very briefly the C, D, B, D, and E aspect of that, of when we can expect to see that on an agenda, or when you would like to see it on an agenda?
B, C, and D?
Well, we just talked about C.
Okay.
So B, D, and E.
B will also be on the same, we would be on the same timeline starting that discussion. We're doing all of the behind kind of the scenes right now, the work, talking to the staff. That's happening very, very soon. I think maybe even this week, Mr. Mancusi. Just getting their input, because right now they don't have a program in that it's not like it's all at ECC, it's blended right now, and we really want to get their input on what that would mean programmatically, because that's really what that discussion's about. The redistricting, that's a big one. And that one's an all year. We're going to have to decide how the board wants to move forward with that. And that's really hiring an outside consultant. That's a big discussion. They're all big, but that one takes a long time to get through that.
And
I'm
racial
sorry.
imbalance is a next June report.
Yeah, you got the report that went to the state on racial imbalance. That's all we have to do right now. They just wanted to know that we're trying to move forward and do what we're supposed to do. We will be back in front of the state. Most likely, they could ask us at any point in time, but we're expecting probably June of 2019, this spring, to update them on where we are on the 2-year timeline that was presented to the board, state board.
Okay, so just as a ballpark, when would we expect to discuss that at the board table prior to that meeting?
When it happened last time, I believe it was probably March, maybe. It was before I went to the state board in June. But
Okay, thank you.
Probably would have to happen sooner in order to say yes, get a consultant,
Oh,
so
yeah,
the consultant
for the
would have some
redistricting.
time to do their work
Yeah.
and bring it forward in March. I would, so it will come up on a board agenda sooner than March. Ms. Maxon Kennelly, followed by Ms. Jacobson?
2 quick questions. First of all, under B for the ECC, obviously we, 4 people have already done the WFC and the ECC tour. 4 more of us are going on September 5th, but I had not been aware that we should also be going to visit this mentions and the Stratfield ECC in terms of touring. Is that something that can be worked into this, or?
That was a request from the last June meeting, and I think it was, and we actually talked about this when we toured both of those programs, that you may want to see it with students in it, because even when we went through ECC and WFC a few weeks ago, that was very much to look at the facility. Right. And so you're looking at it differently when there are children there. So the request was, could we look at, is there a programming difference? Let's see what it looks like at Stratfield, and then see what it looks like at ECC. So that will be made available to you once school gets started.
Okay. And then my second question is that obviously we're awaiting the results of the SPED audit. Are those results being factored into this ECC? I mean, I assume that they are, but I have no idea where the information is from that audit, and therefore how it could factor into this, because I wouldn't want to make any decisions about that without getting that presentation. Do we have, is it even able to impact the conversation? Do you have all that information?
They will be presenting to us in our second meeting in September. So, yeah, I mean, at that point in time, I don't know if it will have huge impacts to this discussion.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, Mr. Mancusi may feel different, but I don't feel like it's going to have huge impacts to this discussion.
Okay.
Ms. Jacobson?
Yeah, just circling back to the redistricting and racial imbalance timeline. So as of right now, we're in compliance with our plan, so much as that we're implementing what we're supposed to be doing. When we talk about moving forward with redistricting at this time and hiring a consultant, I thought that according to this memo and our discussions that we were going to be dependent upon a finalization in terms of the capacity at Mill Hill for us to be able to feasibly conduct that process. So I just wanted to touch base on that.
I might just say, I think what the state board's going to be looking for in June is that we've had conversations, and quite frankly, this whole memo that we were looking at is this whole conversation. We've had big conversations since last spring, and I think they're looking for that, and then they're probably, they would probably like to hear, is the board actually looking at a big redistricting, pocket redistricting, not what we're actually doing down to streets, or if we're doing that, but have we had that conversation? And from their perspective, it's to solve racial imbalance, not our facilities issues.
Okay, so under no rush in order to have an actual plan on that by that time.
I think there, in the plan, it's that we've had the conversation, and that we're moving forward as a school district on how we're going to solve racial imbalance, because that's the piece they're focused on. Yeah, you're welcome.
Anything, and I reported, as I did last June, to the state that we have a variety of options that we want to pursue as a board, including magnet program, as a way to resolve the racial imbalance issue, and that redistricting is the last of all last possible nuclear options. And so they're not expecting us to address that until we've exhausted everything else. Yeah, Mr. Asa.
I'd just like to make a point that a couple of the other town bodies had made it clear that they would like us to explore that, since that is part of how we presented our proposal or ed specs with, whatever, but it was clear that the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen had wanted us to explore the redistricting option, and I was under the assumption that, well, not under the assumption, based on our last meetings, it was clear that it's very hard to come up with a definitive plan without knowing Mill Hill. However, that being said, there may be some initial steps that we want to talk about and see if where that goes. And so I would just be curious to see if, while D, redistricting to resolve facility utilization concerns, is a long-term thing, which I agree with, I do believe that there is some discussion that needs to start in the shorter term. So I would like to see that as a formal agenda item in the coming months.
And I would suggest that when we set our board goals, that we vote in the affirmative that we want to do that, and then, because the board goals define our agenda items, if you will. Last couple of comments on this, and then we'll move on to actually the board goals. Ms. Pitko.
So I know now we're talking about the racial imbalance plan, but as we're going through and vetting every possible structural change outside of redistricting, the only one that's left on here is some kind of magnet program or academy. So are we going to talk about this timeline of looking at redistricting, a consultant to even see? I personally did not buy into the last enrollment projections. That is my own thing. I would prefer to hire another consultant to do that with all the questions that we had vetted at the board table at that time. But I think we need a realistic idea of, if we redistrict, what that would look like. And definitely before we present in March or present to June.
Yeah.
Well, the plan would have to be presented in March to us. So if a new consultant needed time.
Yeah, and establishing it as a goal to do is the first step to then say, yes, we understand we'll have to hire a consultant, let them do their work, and let's get this on an agenda for general conversation, report out of the consultant, and then, as we normally do, bring an official proposal forward at one meeting, and then vote at the next meeting. Let's presume redistricting would require 2 meetings or 3 meetings. And so in order to be ready by the end of May, once the board says, yes, let's do this, we'll say, we've got to have a final vote at the end of the second meeting in May, so let's back up to where we have to get started and, follow that time frame, which is right around the corner. If there aren't any further comments on these two, then we'll move on to board goals. Last comment from Mrs. Jacobson and last comment from Ms. Vitale.
Just a quick question about redistricting. Outside the racial imbalance, are there any concerns about needing to redistrict to put children in Holland Hill for state reimbursement? I know that was an issue for Woods when we were...
I will say, my own personal answer is redistricting is more related to balanced facility utilization than anything else. And so if Holland Hill needs to have an extra couple of streets in order to fully use their facility, or Mill Hill, and Sherman has to lose a couple of streets in order to balance off their over-enrollment, those are all issues that we need to have the consultant guide us on.
So, just for Dr. Jones, if there's any, because I remember for Woods, and also the information wasn't correct back then, that there was a concern for the state that they wanted to know that we needed to do the renovation.
I did ask that question because I think you might have been the one that asked me that, and
I
when
thought Malone and McBroom had mentioned it when
Yeah.
they gave one of the presentations for one of the scenarios they presented, that they wanted to put
I think
children
you're
in the
correct.
seats
Right.
to help with state reimbursement.
When I did ask Sal Morabito that question, and when he recalculated, looked at the capacity, what the enrollment projection was, we're fine at Holland Hill as far as the reimbursement piece. Now, numbers change every year. How many kids will be there next year? You know, I don't know. So, but he did look at that again just to make sure.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question? Ms. Jacobson, and then back to Ms. Pitko again.
Just circling back to the racial imbalance plan, when we discussed that in March, do you envision bringing forward all the components of the plan at that time, or just these couple of specific items in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of all of the strategies that we've been doing?
Well, I mean, I guess that would be the will of the board, but usually what we did in the past was you would look at the actual plan. Yeah, but, yeah.
Yeah. It would be a change from our custom, which the state doesn't generally like when you change customs. Ms. Pitko, Mr. Asa.
Just make sure that I have this right. In our racial imbalance plan, we said that we would consider redistricting after Holland Hill and Mill Hill were built up. When are we getting, I hate to say the results, but after spending the seed money to look at the Mill Hill site, when will we be getting that information back?
Very late.
I'm sorry, probably, and their schedule is not under our control. But the way it's been approved, one would hope that it would be April, May, about the same time we have to make the decision. We may get a hint sooner than that, based on some preliminary plans and cost estimating as to whether the town will support the number that we're looking for, 24 classrooms, or they want to look for a different number. And so if we find the planning from the building committee going forward to get a request to us to change our ed specs, that will give us an earlier hint. But if it all goes well, about the same time we have to make the decision before we submit to the state.
But we have to discuss it in March. I just want to make sure that we're all clear
Yeah, no.
on what the timeline is here.
Yeah, yes, the only hesitancy I make is that we're under the, it depends on how much progress the building committee makes, and we do not control the building committee.
Okay?
Yeah. Is that a fair statement, Mr. Cullen? Okay, Mr. Cullen is nodding yes. Mr. Ace, you're the final comment, then we'll go on to board goals, Mr.
I
Ace?
promise to be the last.
Okay.
Through
Promise
the
you're making for the other 8
Yeah.
board members.
Through the chair to Dr. Jones, in the June meeting, we touched on a little bit about racial imbalance, and I had raised the question about legal consultation and asking our board attorney and the town attorney ramifications, financial punishment potentials, and whatnot. Has anyone reached out to those two attorneys yet?
I had already done that with an outside attorney, and basically there is no precedent that has been set in the state. So if we wanted to be the first to go down that avenue, we could. But I actually went to outside counsel.
Okay, so we have not talked to our internal counsel
Not the
yet.
town, not the town.
Okay. Okay.
Now, Colleen, it's not her specialty,
And
DC.
I'm not
Right.
sitting here saying that I think that I'm advocating that's what we should do, but I would like for, and maybe the board doesn't feel this way, but I would like to say that I would like that our attorney and the town attorney to at least have been asked and get their opinion if we ever did get to that point. I know you've mentioned the implementer bill in the past, which is tied to the current budget, so there will have to be a new implementer bill, and I don't know whether there will be that ramification included in a new implementer bill. Statutorily, it doesn't appear that there are any financial punishments available to the state to punish us for it, but as you said, there's no precedence. So I would just, as I said, I'm not advocating for this at this point. I would just like to know that we've consulted both our attorney and the town attorney simply on, just say, hey, can you look into this if it were to get to a point where the state came to us and said they were going to force us to do this or else.
The only precedent is that tired phrase, you can't fight City Hall. Mr.
Just to
Peterson, Mr.
go-
Asa promised that he was the last comment, but I'll give you relief on that promise.
I'm asking a sentence that he would have asked. On the matrix, I think we saw in June, there was discussion of a presentation by the superintendent, I believe at the September 25th meeting, about the possible implications of this. Is that still something that's being scheduled? You're furrowing your brow at me.
And I'm going to apologize because our June meeting was kind of all over the place, so I don't remember which.
Are you saying you'd want to have a discussion of not complying at our September meeting?
Yes, and I thought that was a topic that we had decided was going to be at an upcoming meeting.
I'll take that under advisement, which means I would have some concerns about that, but I'll share those with you and then, off topic. Okay, let's move on to board goals. I would only make one comment. I see Mrs. Maxon Kennelly's hand up, so let me just make one comment. In the past, normally board members would give 1 or 2 goals. We'd end up with maybe a dozen goals to rate and rank. In the top 4 or 5 for board to talk about and take on was fairly easy to figure out. With the 60-plus goals that were suggested by all 9 of you, energetic volunteers that you are, that became much more difficult. So we have some thinking to do. So I only make that as a comment, Mrs. Maxon Kennelly.
And to prevent massive wordsmithing I can't estimate how many hours it would have taken. I had sat down this weekend thinking to come in with a proposal of, okay, look, I meshed goals 33, 35, 1C, 6B, all of which seemed to be according to one of the top-ranked topics. I cut and paste all of the goals according to topic, and it was staggering. And that's me sitting by myself trying to do it. Trying to picture 9 of us doing it, I thought was more than daunting. So I have a proposal for the board. Essentially, it's a do-over, but
That's a technical term.
yeah, it is a technical term. And as this is coming around, did it already go? I would like to clarify immediately that the reference to SMART here is in no way impugning the quality of the goals, that is an educational term. I don't want to assume that non-educators are familiar with the phrase SMART goals. And thus, it is all capital. There are some extras in case anyone would like some. So my proposal is at the top, which is that we resubmit by this Thursday, so that by Friday, and of course this, I'd like to nod to Mrs. Brown if this is possible with her, but again, that we resubmit 2 to 3 by Thursday, Friday get a new version for voting, and so that they can be done by the following Tuesday, giving time for an electronic resending out to the board on Thursday for our September 11th meeting. With the following things in mind for, again, my opinion of what would be more helpful goals for the board. One is that it's that they are SMART goals, and what SMART goals means is one, that they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And I gave this example of a goal, by the second June meeting, via a minimum of 4 board regular meetings, the BOE will discuss, edit, and pass a district improvement plan for 2015-2020. That was this is not verbatim, but that as an issue was a board goal, so that this is specific with what are we looking to accomplish, when, et cetera. It is measurable, and the metric for measurement on that would have been, we have in hand a district improvement plan. Certainly, I believe, achievable because it is specific, it's relevant to our work, and bound by time. It's not just some open-ended. And then also, I think maybe with an eye toward making sure it's not something that we are already doing, either because of long-standing agenda topics, or because the state statute defining us as a board member requires that we do it. I think to make that a goal would be to say we're not doing what the state statute requires that we do, and which we all swore to when we were sworn in. I do think it's always a good reminder that it should not be direction to staff. Not that we might not need staff help. I mean, the district improvement plan obviously needed staff help, but it was a board commitment to that. And then finally, I actually thought some of the goals were very interesting, but really belonged more in bylaws than as board goals. And just as a thought that for some of them, that maybe people prepare to raise those in November. Now, that's not to say if someone wants to suggest a goal of a bylaws revision involving blank, well, of course, that's a relevant goal. But it's, as I said, this was my suggestion to keep this from becoming 3 to 4 hours of wordsmithing, which I didn't want to do. So my suggestion to the board.
Other comments from board members? Mr. Peterson?
Well, I guess I'd second that. I think that's I think streamlining this would be a very helpful thing. In some ways, I as a first-year board member, I think if we had this in the beginning, I might have come up with a significantly different set of suggestions. But I think if we take a step back and look at what we did, and everyone suggested a lot of great things, it was a good tool to take the temperature of the feelings of various board members, and in that sense, it was useful in itself. If we want to use that as a sense of the board in the broad sense, that's great. But if we want to create kind of an actionable list, this seems like a good approach to me.
Other comments from board members on any individual item or their thought as to how to approach this, or other comment? Mr. Asa, followed by Ms. Jacobson.
I apologize if should be understanding this, but can you explain the numbers on the front page of enclosure 2 under each topic, the numbers in blue? Or those are the numbers? Oh, okay.
Ms. Brown, I wonder if you coded some of them blue. I wonder if you could, versus black print, you know, like using the first one, 1AC, 11AD, 2932 were black, but 16, 29, and 34 are blue. What's the intent of that? Okay. So the blues were different words, but essentially were duplicative of the topic.
Okay, thank you.
At least in Ms. Brown's judgment that they were duplicative of the project. Some of you may have had a thought that you were heading in a different direction, in which, of course, you should explain that. But and if you don't have a color printer and you don't know the difference between blue and black on your document, does that answer your question, Mr. Asa?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Who's next? Ms. Jacobson. Yeah, here we go.
I just wanted to echo the sentiment of Mr. Peterson in that when I got the results, I thought it was just completely fascinating for those who answered especially in terms of the area of how things came shaked out in terms of order. And there was just many instances in this where some people had something as number 1 and other people's had that same thing as last. So I did find it ultimately very fascinating. It's just a comment, but I could also get behind redoing this in a way that is a little bit more streamlined, and that we can get everyone's participation and maybe come up with something that's a little bit stronger and a consensus on it in terms of the order. So I would be in favor of that.
Let me get other board members' comments. Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, no, I think that this is a good idea because we would have to stay here all night to get through all of these goals. So I think that this definitely makes sense. And I guess my only question is, does this timeline work for Mrs. Brown, since she's going to be the one who's going to have to turn everything around? So if it's doable, I mean, I'm assuming that the majority of it is going to be taking things that are already here and just taking some things out and leaving some things behind, but that still will require some work. So, and with the long weekend coming up and everything, I just didn't want to, in the beginning of the school year, I didn't want to put too much.
I will answer as politely as I can. Generally, the slowdown is when board members do not click on the survey and get it answered quickly. And so the sooner that when you get it, like within an hour, vote. And I think if you do that, Ms. Brown will be able to manage it. If the deadline is coming up like at noon before the thing's supposed to go out in the mail and she still hasn't heard from 3 board members, that makes it more difficult. And for instance, right
Just
now.
to point of clarification, this was a little daunting, trying to
It was.
compare that document and that
Absolutely.
Survey Monkey thing, so.
Yep, absolutely. If you think you found it daunting, you should be sitting in Ms. Brown's chair, how to do this. And so the quicker you can get it back, the better off. We do have at the moment 7 out of 9 who responded to this survey. And once we narrow the goals, we really have to have all 9 of you do the survey. But we won't name who didn't.
Does that answer Ms. Gerber's question, though? Is this timeline doable?
I suppose it is. I guess my only concern is just simply that it sounds like we're going to have an absolute elephant of a meeting on September 25th at the rate things are going. So it would absolutely be helpful if we could get at least a preliminary discussion in on the goals for the September 11th meeting. So, you know, and obviously, and if people don't respond and we don't get it done, then it'll just have to be pushed off a little bit. So, but just wanted to get that out there that this is in fact doable before we even go in that direction.
Pending results of the official survey, if the board had an interest in at least saying, here are the, I'll make it up, 10 items that are going to be officially surveyed, we could have a preliminary discussion on all 10 of those items, pending that the next meeting we know what the actual results are. So there's, that might help us clarify some. Let's see. Anybody else? Ms. Vitale?
Thank you, Ms.
Oh, no,
Maxinelli.
wait a second. Mr. Peterson's hand
I'm
was
sorry,
up.
Jeff.
Okay.
Thank you. I agree that we need to definitely streamline. When I was doing them, I was trying to be short and sweet and measurable. But I'm happy that's one of them already, pretty much has already been met, so that's great. I am a little hesitant to put the facilities goal off. I feel like we just keep on kicking the can, and based on our discussion tonight, if we could have some sort of decision made on where we're going for facilities, I think it would be helpful, since it sounds like we are pretty much on the same page and there is some consensus, and just for the good of the public who has been following us on this rocky journey for the last 9 months, I think it might be beneficial just to have cross one thing off the list, being that we seem to know that we have to do this.
My personal submission will be a goal that says we need to answer these 4 questions: magnet, ECC, Walter Fitzgerald, and redistricting. And that'll be a principal goal. That will be what I will submit for the board to consider. And
I mean, I understand you don't want to take action on this tonight, but I would even, all right.
yeah, we don't have an action item on the agenda, so, similar to what happened in June, it strikes me that I have no doubt that this board is going to make that facility a prime goal for them to accomplish. I sense that based on conversation. Mr. Peterson, right?
Just to go back, the only thing I was going to add earlier to this process is presumably if we find someone else's goal that we like better than, we can already kind of take a round of voting in terms of submitting them in, right? Or do you want 2 or 3 from the ones that we did but refined?
Yeah, you don't have to submit your own goal. You could say, I like this goal. I didn't think of it, but I like it.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we can take a round of sifting,
Yeah.
and then that was all I was going to say.
Yep. I know that one of my problems with the goals is that, let's say the one of them was 1A through D. And I liked B. I didn't necessarily like A, C, and D, but I liked B. But the goal was the goal. So I think even to the extent that you look at a particular letter and say, that's the one I like, the board should feel free to submit whatever it is that they want that represents their personal feeling. Any other conversation on board goals? I do encourage that it's not something that we already do, that it's not saying, we have a goal, let the staff accomplish it. That this really is board goals that we take ownership on. That doesn't mean the staff aren't doing some research for us so that we can move it along, but it is our goal. There were a number, 5, 6, 7, whatever it was, that could only be done if we change the bylaws, which we have on our on our Board of Bylaws, that we address that each November. So you are free to bring that forward as a board goal, but I would recommend that, that those who recommended those items be prepared to bring those thoughts forward in November, because it's really right around the corner. But that's up to the board. Last comments on this topic? Last comments on this topic? Mrs. Maxon Connolly.
So just to reiterate, this Thursday, 2 days from today, is when we get them to Mrs. Brown.
Yes.
Just repeating that first line for everyone.
Yes.
Myself included.
And Ms. Brown will play the heavy and send you an email if she hasn't heard from you. But it'll be over my signature so that she doesn't have to take the whole hit. Anything else final? Okay. Under new business, Walter Fitzgerald campus tuition. Mr. Mancusi, you want to come forward? Dr. Jones, do you have any opening comments that you wish to make?
This is just a reflection of an original memo that was written in 2016, and Mr. Mancusi's asked that we update that. We do have interest from a district for a student. So, Mr. Mancusi?
Yeah, the primary reason we're asking for a revision to the tuition is that we are an in-district program. The tuition that was set previously at $59,000 was or $57,000 was the tuition for CES, which is an out-of-district program. In-district programs typically do not cost the same tuition as out-of-district programs, so we would ask that the board consider revising the tuition to $35,000, which represents close to twice our PPE, and then the memo's pretty clear. If special education or 504 services or additional services would be billed per diem according to the staff member providing the service, similar to how we bill our open choice students.
So can I clarify one thing? The staff put this on for discussion. I presume that you are comfortable with us actually taking action on September 11th.
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. Questions, Mr. Acer, followed by Mr. Peterson, and then Mrs. Maxon Connolly.
I know you stated that the $35,000 is roughly twice our PPE expenditure. I'd like to know, did you do any data analysis on what the costs have been for the students that are at the campus now to try and come up with a cumulative average or number to see, like, I don't want to, what I'm saying is I don't want to just go for a number that's just twice PPE. I would like to know that there's some data behind it.
We did not. That number was a number that Gail Donowitz and I actually thought was a fair number based on our experiences of previously having experience sending students to other districts and paying tuition for them.
Okay, so based on your experience, but not actually calculating real numbers?
I did not do an actual cost of programming of our current WFC students who are Fairfield students had they been out-of-district students.
Okay.
If that's something that you want me to do, I'd be happy to do that.
Well, approving a reduction from $57,000, granted I understood that was CES, to $35,000 is quite a decrease. So I would like some assurances that it's not going to go over that.
Not going to go over
The
$57,000?
$35,000 that you're proposing.
$35,000 that we're proposing is a base tuition. And then there would be additional costs of programming based on, say, a student with an IEP, or based on if a student is at Walter Fitzgerald and the PPT determines that the student would benefit from participation in the impact program.
Okay,
there.
I understand that, but one of the things I'm finding a common theme lately is it seems like numbers are being pulled out of thin air. I like data, I like analysis, I like facts. So while I respect this hoping to be an accurate number, I'm just voicing my concern on that, and that is my concern as a board member, not speaking for anyone else.
And I'd like to clarify that the cost that you're looking for is, what is the base cost for a student at Walter Fitzgerald? And then what is the average, I'll say, supplemental cost for 504 or IEP or special services? because we're talking about the 35,000 is the base cost. This is kind of like a cost-plus contract. And so you're comparing our base cost to the tuition-based cost. Am I clarifying that correctly?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I can't imagine it would be so difficult to calculate that number and present it to us.
No, I wouldn't think so, but I was just restating it so that Mr. Mancuso was clear as what you were looking for.
Yeah, we would be happy to do that.
Okay. So that information this will still be on as an action item, but that information will be available before you take action.
Yeah, and as long as it's within this realm, but if it turns out to be something different, then we'll go there, we'll cross that bridge.
So, Mr. Asa, just so I'm clear, I'm going to do a cost analysis of what programming would cost for students who currently attend Walter Fitzgerald, and I will do a cost analysis on students who get impact support versus students who are only 504 students, or students that don't even have a 504 plan or an IEP.
Dr. Jones would like to make a comment.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand the base cost, because we don't calculate students for a base cost across the district. Our PPE is based on over 9,000 students, all distributed equally. So there really is not a great formula for going in and deciding you cost this amount, you cost this amount. This extra services, certainly we can, because we have additional providers. What we were doing with the 35,000 is we have some experts in this area with Mr. Mancusi and also Ms. Donowitz, who place students in outplacements and understand tuitions. And if you remember last year, during the budget, they pretty much range for outplacement. You start at about 50, 60, and it'll go up to several hundred thousand. So they've gone based on their experience of having students in district programs for a base price. But I just want to be very clear, we can't go and parse out what a student costs just because they're at WFC, because that's not how per pupil is calculated.
Okay, I understand that, and that was kind of my point, that with the district as a whole, we're dividing it by those thousands of numbers, but at this campus, we have a small number of students. So my question is, we're talking about a potential student coming in from out of town, right?
Right.
And what we're going to charge them. So if everyone else is charging $50,000 to $70,000, why are we charging $35,000?
Because that's a different level of programming. That's not an alternative educational setting inside a district. That's why this is kind of a unique program. When you go to outplacement, Mr. Mancusi, you can answer this better than I.
A lot of districts don't have alternative programs in their district. So at times, similar to this situation, they seek neighboring districts who do have alternative programs that they would be interested in pursuing or investigating versus them investigating outplacements. So the students that we would accept from other districts in our area are students who can be appropriately programmed for within a public school district whose level of need, according to the PPT in this situation, does not exceed that which can be met in a public school, does not require placement in an out-of-district program with, like CES, with a tuition of, say, $60,000. So, you know, it's a win-win situation, I think, for all of us. But I will be more than happy to do.
Yeah, and I'm a proponent of this. I would like to bring students in and charge a tuition. I think it's a great potential revenue source. And it also gives these students an opportunity to come to our district and benefit from our programming that you're putting on. I just, when you say the words, we doubled the PPE, we thought this would be inappropriate, it raises a red flag for me, which is why I ask these questions, because I just don't like, I like to know where numbers come from.
So I have four other people who wish to speak: Mr. Peterson, Mrs. Maxon Kennedy, Mrs. Gerber, and Ms. Pitko, and Ms. Vitale. So let me go on to Mr. Peterson.
This is a basic question I think touches on what Mr. Asa was getting at, and it's going to come out kind of mercenary, but is there a reason that we're not charging what the market will bear?
We think, through our experience, that $35,000 is a fair tuition, base tuition for an in-district program.
But
When
your
you
point-
get up to $60,000 or into the $50,000 range, then you can look at out-of-district placements.
And by the last 2 years, we had this price, and nobody took us up on it,
Yeah.
is I think what Mr. Mancuso is saying.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm done.
Mr. Peterson, anything else?
No, I'm done.
Okay. Ms. Maxon Kennelly?
Yeah, that was actually one of the points I was going to make, is that one way we could look at this is not a decrease of 57,000, but an increase from zero, which is what we're currently getting out of this. And one thing I'm sure Mr. Mancusi and Dr. Jones is familiar with this, but when we hammered at this when we first approved it, I just want to reiterate what that board said, because I'm sure this board would feel the same way, is that it was a very strongly held conviction of the board. This whole idea that, and that's why we put the explicit language in there, is that someone being interested in taking advantage of this program is no guarantee of placement, that we were very, very concerned that in no way would someone coming from another district in any way negatively impact the Fairfield students who are being serviced there. So that's just a statement that was something that was a very strongly held belief of that previous board. A couple of other things. Also, I recognize that this would make it difficult to calculate the cost at Walter Fitzgerald, which is the fact that the numbers change over the course of the year. So when you're talking smaller numbers, that also makes it harder to put, a finger on that. And also just a reminder that the nature of just to Mr. Mancusi's point, that the nature of alternative high school, you could be talking about credit recovery situations. You could be talking about school avoidance issues, so that there's a lot that this campus, a lot of needs that this campus can serve and can fulfill. And that's what makes it so very different from so many of the outplacement options. So I know I'm very much in favor of this, along with the reminder that it does not negatively impact the service we provide our Fairfield students. And I agree with Mr. Asa that it'd be wonderful to turn this into a manageable revenue source.
Mrs. Gerber?
Yeah, just one quick question. Just in terms of the language change from the old paragraph to the new paragraph, in the old paragraph they have the related services, speech and language, OT, PT, nursing, etc., and they talk about rehab associates and the $71.50 per hour. The new paragraph doesn't have any specific numbers. I didn't know what.
Similar to the way we do it with our open choice. It's actual, the staff provider who's providing the service, we charge per diem rate according to that specific. So it's an actual staffing cost
Okay.
of the person providing the service at the time.
Okay. And then I guess the other question too, since we just earlier tonight were talking about possible change in site for Walter Fitzgerald, is that something that we would be I'm assuming we'd share that with any possible students who would be coming?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ms. Pitko?
So my question through the chair to Mr. Mancusi, I was on the board when we originally put this into action. We had originally voted on putting 5 tuition students. I'm wondering currently, do we have enough staffing to maybe increase it? I know we're talking about moving Walter Fitzgerald, but in the future, maybe increasing the amount of tuition students we bring to Walter Fitzgerald.
Yes, if there's availability, we're open to that. Right now, we're excited that we have one district calling us and expressing interest, so we're going to spread the word.
At the time we passed this, there were some board members who wouldn't vote for it unless we limited it to 5. If we get to where there's 4 students here, I'm going to suggest that the board might be amenable to looking at a higher number, unless the board tells me, no, just because Ms. Pitko asked the question doesn't mean the rest of us agree with it. So I'm going to say I think there's room for making that number a bigger number, but that's the genesis of where it ended up at 5. And let's wait till we get to 3 or 4 before we address that as an issue. Ms. Vitale?
Through the chair, Dr. Jones, the Fairfield Public Schools has the sole discretion of student acceptance. Who do you foresee making that decision? What staff people?
That really goes back to Ms. Donowitz and Mr. Mancusi.
Yeah, we would work with the sending district, look at the student profile, go through an intake, and determine whether or not we can provide an appropriate program for that student. And if we did accept a student, and we thought that the student was struggling or we wasn't being as successful as we thought, we would consult with the other district to advise them that we don't feel that this is an appropriate placement for X, Y, and Z.
Ms.
Done.
Talley?
That's good.
Okay.
That's-
Anybody on this side of the table? Ms. Jacobson, then I'll come back to Ms. Pitko.
So after touring the facilities at Walter Fitzgerald the other day, and coupling with this conversation now, in terms of looking at when we do have the discussion on that in terms of space, is it your or administration's vision at this point that when we talk about that space, it should be able to accommodate a larger number of students than what they currently have today?
Our current WFC enrollment is increasing. We can take more students. Not saying out-of-district students versus Fairfield students, but we do have room for more students.
In that current space now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Ms. Pitko.
Since we're on the topic of Walter Fitzgerald, I just have questions pertaining to this. We have regular special ed, regular teachers there, special ed teachers. Do we have, we bring in like rehab associates, any other services?
Well, for students who require occupational therapy, obviously rehab. I don't think we have anybody who gets physical therapy. Speech, they have, speech is serviced by the home school speech pathologist.
psychologist?
I mean, speech pathologist. We have a full-time school psychologist at WFC.
Nurse?
We have a nurse, and we have, our 2 impact clinicians, a full-time WFC social worker, and then our impact social worker.
So in the current environment, we're bringing in a student. Do we have room for all of those people where they are right now?
You mean the staff?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that it for conversation? So I think your homework is the cost basis for your analysis, and then bring it forward as an action item.
Thank you.
So on to 5B, discussion of facilities plan and waterfall schedule. That's these documents. For the board members, I'll remind you that annually there is a capital workshop that occurs every fall, generally in September, but sometimes October. And the town asks the school district to update their, quote, waterfall chart, which then requires us to update some of the plan documents. We have recognized this as a dynamic document, and so as you'll see on the cover of this particular book, that it was approved in 2015, it was first approved in 2011. And so one could look and say, with the changes that we're looking at, in the town's final decisions on Mill Hill and our decisions on ECC and Walter Fitzgerald, that the spring of 19 might be a time for us to actually vote a fully revised plan. We have generally allowed the staff to update it for the purpose of meeting the submission for the September waterfall chart discussion by the Board of Finance. So this is not being brought forward specifically as a update and approval process, but if the board desired to follow up on this discussion and do so, then that would be a board goal and we would move it forward accordingly. Mr. Cullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Tom Cullen, Executive Director of Operations. And I want to thank this board for allowing me this opportunity to provide you an update on the documents. Does everybody have a copy of the documents? And I didn't know with some new board members if they wanted an understanding of how the documents work, or if you just want me to start right in on my presentation.
What is the desire of, were there anything on the document that you said, I don't understand this, could you explain the layout and how it all works? Is that where some board members would like to start? Why don't you do a quick, here's what each document means
Okay.
and how it relates one to the other.
So the booklet document is first, I want you to recognize that we put a new photo of Holland Hill Structural Steel Edition in there on the front cover to show the status of current projects. We updated the Malone and McBroom information inside that was from last year, the utilization and capacity chart, and then the bulk of the changes and updates are really in the language for each school history. So we updated what school projects received approval, and building committees are on board now, and a lot of the capacity deficiencies that have been finished. And there's a lot of good, exciting news in all the updates that I'm going to share with you tonight quickly.
So could you explain the genesis of the original program capacity deficiencies? What report that came from?
Right. Originally, MGT of America was hired back in 2010, even before 2010, and they were asked to help us with a capacity deficiency. So they met with principals, they looked in all our schools, and they identified all of the portable classrooms, and then where we had deficiencies, like if we were doing OTPT in the hallway, that was a deficiency. If we had classrooms in portable classrooms, that was a deficiency. If 2, 3, 4 teachers were sharing a room and seeing students, that was a deficiency. And so they were all listed. And we've been working as a district as a whole to eliminate portables and eliminate these deficiencies, especially when we have the opportunity to do large-scale renovations and additions.
Any questions on the booklet?
So,
We can come back to that, but if there are any initial questions on the booklet. Next?
Yep. The next document you want to look at is the one that has,
I'm sorry, well, I had a couple of questions just about some of the things in the booklet, but they're also in the change thing, so I don't know if I should just wait.
it's
I want to make sure.
totally up to you. I think the best document to review with you tonight is
Okay,
this
we'll
one,
wait.
because it's the summary.
Okay, thanks.
But I can answer questions at any time.
So what's next?
So the next document we do is the waterfall schedule. The way the waterfall works is the top portion are the fiscal years, and the colors donate if the project is very large, that it has multiple years of funding. So technically, when we look at like a Holland Hill renovation at 18 million plus, the contractor, once he's on board, won't spend 18 million in the first fiscal year. It's near impossible. So we tried to provide for the town how many years we think that contractor will work, how much they're going to draw down on the demands of the bonds, and what we think they're going to need to pay these contractors and subcontractors. And we spread it out over 2, 3, or 4 years. So the colors follow the drawdown for each project. It also identifies with an asterisk if it's a non-recurring project, so that they get all added up. It identifies the capital projects. It identifies the reimbursement that we project.
So the
Then-
top section is the approval year. The bottom section is kind of like a cash flow statement.
Correct. The next document is something that the Board of Finance asked for 4 or 5 years ago. They wanted to see like a summary that would identify what changes happened. And this is probably the best document for you to look at. It's exciting and good news for a lot of reasons, and I'll review those. But right on the top, it shows you that we were able to eliminate 4 years. The district has done so well with approving projects and finishing them that we were able to take 4 previous years off the waterfall, and that's identified in item 1, right at the top. The next thing, if you look down the left-hand side, you see things like removed, cost increase, cost decrease, moved item, or new item. So this identifies to you right away if we reduced a project, moved a project out in the waterfall, if it's a brand-new project that it's raised its head, or if there were changes done. So I can start doing a few of those, but generally I'd like to get to the non-recurring items that we need to request. But if you look at the top of the page, item number 2 says the Holland Hill addition and renovation at $17,250,000 was the old number. We added the $50,500 to it, which is under it, to get that total amount added to the $1.24 million for the project seed money, comes up to the building committee number of $18,540,500. So that's kind of how it reads. So when we go to the town financial workshop in Summit, We'll be explaining those changes so they can see that the numbers all add up. So if you go down further, none of the other ones in 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 have changed. You've got to drop down to the 2 removed items. And this is where I was mentioning there's a lot of good news. The district, we're going to be able to save the district over $1.5 million with the roof extensions for McKinley and Rogerville Middle School roofs. Those roofs are expiring as far as the warranty goes, but the Firestone roof manufacturer came out and walked the roofs with our PM contractor and said we're doing such a good job that for 0.03 cents a square foot in repairs, they'll renew the extension for 5 or even 10 years on our warranty. So I was able to take these out of the waterfall. I'm going to put them into our operating budget. We're going to have to spend maybe $3,500 on each roof, and we're going to get a new letter and extension on the warranty. So our roofs are doing very well on those 2 schools. So that was good news, and we're looking forward to sharing that with the town and the Board of Finance.
I see Mr. Peterson is taking clear notes on that good news. Right? Mr. AC, you have a question?
Yeah, just regarding the roof. So with the extension and whatnot, what does it do to the overall life? I know they're giving us an extension for that money and whatnot, but when are we going to be looking at actually having to do the work that we're not because of this?
The work we're going to do in 1920's budget is going to be minimal and come out of our roof PM program. The manufacturer will come out and watch it. Our PM contractor will do some minor repairs that he's asking for, and then they'll review it and write a brand new letter extending the roof warranty.
Okay. So when do these roofs go back into the
So
plan?
now, that'll depend on if we get a 5 or a 10-year extension. We'll push them out on our long-range plan.
Okay.
Just so you know, Burr's School is not doing as well. They looked at Burr's roof, and we're going to have some options for that too. That'll save some money, but it's going to cost us a little more than
So once you
these.
determine what the length of the extension is, then we'll see that pushed
Correct.
out future years. But
Correct.
it will be noted in here.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Can
So
you?
that was good news on those 2, and it gets
Sorry,
you to...
Mrs. Gerber
Okay,
has a
sure.
question as well.
Sorry, while we're talking about the roofs. So with Burr, I saw that went up, and that's on the second page, actually. The warranty, it's 6768. So that's going up by $150,000. So I guess my question is, is there some way that we can make sure that whatever your staff is doing at Roger Ludlow and McKinley, that they do that at other roofs? Or it just seems like if you can
We
get
are.
such a great
Burr is
reduction
not.
on these.
Yeah, Burr is not.
Because, I mean, Burr and McKinley were built, and Roger Ludlow.
They were, but
well,
they're
well,
different
Roger
roof
Ludlow's a little-
systems. Different roof systems, and it's not holding up as well as McKinley and Rogerville Middle School. We still have a lot of good PM we're doing there, but the roof itself is not doing as well, and they won't extend that.
Right, yeah, because, I mean, just, we were talking about 3,500, for the others, and then we're up to 650.
However, the 650,000 is an extremely low number for what we're going to do to that roof to replace it and get it back to new condition
Okay.
versus a brand-new roof.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I can share information on all that when the time comes
Okay, thanks.
for that.
Ms. Jacobson?
Yeah, same, going back to the McKinley and RLMS roof warranty. I know that you had said, is it going to be, are you sure it's going to be $3,500 each for that?
We have a letter from the manufacturer that's 0.03 cents per square foot
So you figured out.
on those 2 roofs.
Okay.
And very, very pleased with the PM program we've been doing and what they saw.
And you said that you were moving it to the BOE operating budget. So does that mean that you're going to put it in maintenance services?
It'll
for
be
this
under
year?
the roof PM program. It's such a small amount, and our roof PM contractor will do the work with the manufacturer watching it.
Okay.
The really good news there is Firestone didn't have a roof extension program. This is something new that they've come out with, and they're following the model that Garland Roof is doing and other roofing companies. So we're real lucky we were able to get them out and walk these roofs and give us such a high praise for the work we're doing
Okay. All right.
on those.
Go ahead, Jen.
You want to follow up on that question? Mrs. Gerber, followed by Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just so But Roger Ludlow is considerably bigger than McKinley, correct? So is it 3,500 for each, or is one?
No, it's just roughly what we were looking at. I don't know the exact amount until we get on the roof. But we have a letter from the manufacturer that says 0.03 cents per square foot for,
Square foot, but obviously the
for
square
the roof
footage of
extension.
Roger Ludlow
Correct.
is considerably more than
Yes.
McKinley.
not considerably, but it is more.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
A couple of things. First is, I assume that everything that is on the waterfall schedule should be on the summary of changes, correct? I found one that wasn't, and I didn't check more than that because it just jumped out at me, because I was looking at the removed ones, and the, where is it? Lost my place. The two Stratfield projects of 2020 and 21, the front facade and the front retaining wall, both of which removed on the change document, but not indicated that according to the other schedule that they'll appear in 2022 and 23, unless I am not reading something correctly.
Yeah, I'm seeing them on 22 and 23.
Well, on this, but not on this.
Yeah, they're on items number 32, 33, 34, 35.
Right, but it doesn't indicate where they're moved to.
Yeah, it
There-
does.
Yeah, see
If
the
you look,
numbers in
if you
red?
follow them over, the green is in 2021, and then the red, two more columns over is
Gotcha.
the new year.
All right, so I was just looking through, that's why I wanted to check that I was reading it wrong.
And I want to thank the superintendent, because she told me to add the numbers on the left, so we'd be able to tell you what number to look at.
And then I was,
Very helpful.
sorry. My two other, I have a few questions in the booklet, but I was hoping you could explain, because obviously when something new appears, I'm very interested to know what it is. And all of these HVAC, BMS control upgrades, because they seem to be responsible for bumping down some projects that have been waiting to be done for quite some time.
Sure.
So it clearly can't be adding air conditioning unless you have found a way to do it for $200,000.
No, it's not.
So I was wondering if you could explain what those are.
Sure, I'll do that. If you want to take them in order.
I assume they were all
on-
the same thing.
Yep, line item 27, they're not, they're all different.
Oh.
Line item 27 is Fitz House at Ward High School. Fitz House is from the early 1990s. It has 4 large HVAC units, 250-ton, 230-ton. They are all starting to fail. They're over 25 years old. One of the 50-ton units, we just are doing repairs today, but they're Band-Aid repairs. So we wanted to get it into the non-recurring number. We have an engineer working with us on all 4 and start replacing those. So that's going to be similar to the library unit we replaced at Ward High School 2 summers ago. We're going to start replacing large pieces of equipment. They require a crane. They're a lot of work. Steel dunnage needed because the units that we're putting in now will be a little bit larger. So you're going to start seeing those across the waterfall. That just came up this last year, so all 4 are in the waterfall, and we're spreading them out where we think they're going to fail and be needed. The second item,
Well, I apologize for,
Sure.
I'm talking about number 29, 43, 52, that
Correct.
specific reference.
okay, so I was going to go to number 28 next. This is the item we've been working with the town on. The town's already jumped the gun and done the repairs on their end. We've got a building management system, computerized control, that our staff and contractors have a notebook computer. They can literally dial into the school and the HVAC system from home or from any location. When they do that, right now it's an old system. It goes across our IT server. When they're doing that, it opens up the server for anybody to security risk get into our server. So the town is working with the school systems, IT departments, and we're trying to get rid of that program. This is that program. This is going to go in, change that system so that when our users dial in or use their computer to look at a building or a control, HVAC control, it won't go across the server and open it up for security risk. So the towns just did this last year. I saw the bid go through. I'm looking at what they're doing. We have an engineer working with us to do it on our end, and we'll be presenting it to the town. And I've already heard from Bob Mayer, the CFO of the town, wanting to know, are we doing this? We want to make sure we're fixing this. This is a goal the town wants to meet. So that was item number 28. Item number 29 you just brought up, along with the engineer that's helping us with these upgrades, we have to start looking at all of our HVAC controls. The last time the district went and upgraded all the controls was 1999 with Johnson Control. Well, that was a long time ago. Those systems are failing. We can no longer get the boards and the parts we need, and we have to start thinking about upgrading all our schools' HVAC controls, especially with all the new additions and renovations we're doing and equipment we're adding. So we're working with a company in a long-term plan, and I want to ask the town bodies when we go in front of the workshop, financial workshop, do we want to try and bundle this all together as a $4.5 million project, or do we want to do this over 20 years and do one school a year? So at least for now, I put a placeholder in to start doing one school a year.
Okay, thank you. In the booklet, just a couple of questions. Hold on. Let me get to my spot. On page 6, I have to ask under Holland Hill, at the completion of the large renovation, there may be some additional site or building needs.
Yeah, when the building committee gets finished, there may be some things that they don't complete with the overall whole project. There may be some things that are related to security safety, maybe extra parking. Usually we run into storage issues. We find that even when we do spend a lot of money and do a big renovation and addition, we don't address and fix everything on that site. So I wanted to make sure I had a placeholder that said, when the project's done, we may enter some things here in the future. We may not.
Can I clarify? That's not to say that they won't comply with the ed specs.
Correct.
They'll comply with the ed specs, but there may be stuff that we didn't put into the ed specs or that came up after that.
And that was my next question, because I recall that with the Stratfield project, that additional issues emerged, and there was a tug-of-war, a small battle regarding the building committee's desire to wrap up the
Right.
project, return the small amount that was left.
Correct.
I don't remember if the central office
you have a
position
good
of
memory.
spend that. Yeah, so is there a better way to resolve that? So,
Well,
and I'm not saying I have a preference, but I do recall that being quite an issue.
You're correct, and that was one way Stratfield Building Committee handled it. That's not why I'm doing it here. There's other reasons too. I mean, even in our new schools that were built, McKinley and Burr, we found that there were some things that we wanted to do extra with parking, not enough parking, sidewalks that didn't go all the way out to the parking spaces, storage needs for maintenance for the school, security safety issues we're working every year with the police on. So there's things that may not get all finished even in a big renovation and addition, and this is a living document. So that was the intent.
You still have questions, but
Yeah.
Mr. Asa.
Where is that placeholder for those items that you just talked about, Holland Hill?
I don't have that in the waterfall. I don't have a placeholder yet, but I have it in the document to make sure I come back to it when the job's done. If there's anything left, we'll add that in. So for the next update.
So
So
we're
they
noting
don't
it, but we're
exist
not
yet.
putting numbers.
Because I don't know what they could be. I don't know if they're gonna do the security vestibule like they did at Riverfield or not.
Well, we have a building committee, we have specs, we have an architectural plan, and they're actually building the building. So how do we not know what they're doing?
We don't know everything yet. I don't know that they're gonna do everything that the building requests until it's finished. And they fill it with the staff, fill it with the students, and get back to us and say, yes, they met everything in the ed spec and we're happy with the entire building, or, you know what, we could have used an extra room for storing snow plows and this and that, or,
Okay, so what
A
kind of
security
money are
item.
you anticipating this being?
I don't know. I don't know, Nick. at
But
this
how do
time.
you put something in the document that says there by 2020 and not have any idea what you plan to? I mean, are we talking about a small number, like just a little thing here and there, or are we talking about big money? Because, and that has nothing to do with the budget for the project, right? This is
No,
a
it
separate
doesn't.
thing.
It doesn't. This would be just in general when we've done these documents.
So what I'm concerned with when I see language like this is that if the building committee feels that they can't get something done in their budget, that they're going to leave it alone, thinking that you're going to pick it up after the fact.
Well, I'm not.
That's my hesitation here, is that, is because this is opening the door to the building committee then saying when we get to push and shove, and if there's a couple things that can't get done, let's say with space issues or storage or whatnot, well, we don't have to do it because Tom's going to have a backup placeholder to cover it. And I
No,
just
that
don't want to
wasn't
set
the
that
intent.
precedent.
That wasn't the intent.
I understand that, but it can be perceived that way, and we need to be very careful about perception and how we present this, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I had a placeholder that when the project is done, we're going to either place in here that we completed and met all the ed specs and there's no other needs for Holland Hill, or by the time that's done, if there are some items, there's going to be a placeholder for it.
And I would say, thank goodness we have an attentive Board of Ed member who is serving as liaison to that building committee. And I would say that the example that I recall with Stratfield, and this was something that happened as the project was ending, I believe it was that front retaining wall.
Correct.
Which is still, has not been addressed yet.
Yeah.
So, and has now been pushed out 2 additional years. But, so I understand what you're saying. There are things you don't anticipate and did not exist as issues when the building project began. And it's just, well, that's what
And I
was
understand
asking
what Mr. Asai is saying. On the elementary schools, it's less of a problem. We've seen the worst problem with some of the middle schools and the high schools we renovated, because we didn't do windows, we didn't do all the roofs, we didn't do all the security items. There wasn't the funding for all of that. A lot of building envelope repairs. So we're still going back to do some of those items and requesting them. But I do see they're less detailed when we get to the elementary schools. We've been getting good funding for all of the elementary schools. But as past practice, I wanted to have a placeholder that we can go back and put something in if we have to.
Okay, and then I believe my last question, some of my others I'm going to let go. Obviously, the last time, or my memory, the last time we heard a number affixed to Mill Hill was the jaw-dropping 25 million, which I'm now seeing at 18.7. I was wondering if you could give us some background on how that is a fairly significant revision. I didn't think the building committee was at a point of producing a number
No.
like that. So I was wondering how we managed to so quickly save $6.3 million.
We didn't reduce it from 25 million. The number we put in there was the Holland Hill number with an escalation. So that's what we're carrying as a placeholder until the Mill Hill Building Committee gets documents for a 378, 441, or a 504 design and starts really pulling some numbers together. We thought the smartest thing to do, put the Holland Hill number in there with a 1.5-year escalation is what we figured. That's how we came up with that number. You have to take the number that's in there plus the project seed money of 1.5 and you get the total.
Then, and this is my last question, could you refresh my memory? Where did that 25 come from?
It was a verbal response to a board member's question. That's all it was.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Pitko.
I have to agree with Mr. Asa. I'm a little nervous that we give a number for any project, say Mill Hill coming up, and then we put a line item in saying, well, but if they don't do everything in the amount of money we said they were going to do, we're going to put some extra in the budget. That's a bad precedent to set to other town bodies when we go in front of them advocating to build our schools.
My only,
I understand your reasoning for doing it, but the better thing would be make sure that the building committee is putting in everything that they need, and that we're accurately representing how much that school is going to cost to build.
my comment on that is that 5 years ago, that same question was debated at the Board of Finance. I think Mr. Bolito brought forward the idea that says, look, if we're going to do this building, let's do it right, spend all the money we need to fix all the things that we think is necessary to make this building last 20, 25 years. This town has never been willing to budget for that kind of an approach to a building. And virtually every building that we've renovated, we have left things undone as a district. And this, I believe, is a statement that just reminds the town bodies that just because we had a major investment in this building don't think that we've fixed everything that we can imagine will need to be fixed so that we don't have to come back to this for 30 years.
Luckily, the windows were done there, but all the
And
roofs
without
weren't done.
knowing what the unknowns are, it's difficult, I think,
The
to put any number down.
existing building committee is not replacing all the roofs on Holland Hill.
So let me ask you a question, and this is actually for you, Mr. Dwyer. That's what the seed money was for, right? For us to look at the site, look at what the building needed. I mean,
the
I'm
seed
trying to
money
understand,
was-
I've only been doing this for 3 years, so please explain to me.
The seed money was to say, investigate to the building so that you can comply with the ed specs that we passed. The ed specs do not include fix everything that might be on a preventative maintenance basis needed for the next 20 or 30 years. That's, it just, here's the seed money, tell us what it's gonna cost to comply with the ed specs, specifically.
That's correct.
Yeah, I was in favor of Mr. Bolito's, let's just spend it so we don't have to keep coming back to these buildings, but that's not the way this district has budgeted money. Just hasn't. Let's see, where were we? Mrs., huh? Yeah, Mrs. Gerber, I think Mr. Peterson, and Ms. Vitale.
I just wanted to go back to the, all of these new, the HVAC controls upgrades. I did notice on page 2, it's number 66 and number 74. They have Sherman and Mill Hill. So for those renovations that those schools are getting, that wouldn't include this? This is
We
something-
didn't include that
Because they're
because
both getting air conditioning systems, though,
they're
correct?
getting AC, but we're not touching some of the existing equipment that's already there at the building.
Okay, so
And
both
the-
of these take place considerably after the renovations.
The long-range plan we did with the professional engineers looked at the worst-case scenario at the schools. So the ones where we're having the most trouble, failing equipment, circuit boards, the controls talking to the equipment, is how we put them in order.
Okay, and then just with the remaining elementary schools on page 1 that you have Dwight, Jennings, Osborne Hill, and North Stratfield. Those are all elementary schools that don't have air conditioning, and they're all elementary schools that have renovations at some point in the increasingly distant future with each year's
Some of 'em
plan.
do.
For Osborne Hill is up to like, what, 2030 now or something? But I guess my question is, and since it's like 103 degrees out today, I don't know if there's any rationale to even bring up something that can be done. I mean, and I understand that the full air conditioning is going to be, that's not within the realm of what we have here. But are there any other measures that can be taken to help these schools, especially the ones that don't have the full air conditioning? Is there some work that could be done in conjunction with this somehow to just make the schools a little more bearable?
Yeah, I've talked with the superintendent about that, where we can air condition as much as possible. The important thing is the mechanical means of fresh air. It's really not even the air conditioning. If we can just get air movement,
Right.
it makes a huge difference.
And so would
So-
these upgrades give anything for that, or is this something?
No, you're
completely-
talking $1 million, $1.2 million to do an elementary school.
Right, no, I'm aware of that, but I just didn't
know.
know if there was, and I understand that those are kind of tied into each school's,
The
Jennings,
larger,
North
you're
Stratfield,
right.
Osborne Hill, and
Correct.
Dwight's renovations. So I guess my question is there anything that can be done in the meantime to try to help these schools, because they really are hellacious?
We have done some things with fans, large circular fans for like the APRs where the kids are all grouped together. Some of the classrooms have fans in the transoms or in the corner of their rooms. So we've done a lot with fans, but that's really not ideal.
Right,
It's a Band-Aid effect, but
okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Peterson, I think you were next, and then Ms. Vitale.
Thank you. I guess I have multiple questions. I didn't know if we were going to go straight through them, but it seems like we're jumping over. To go back to something that relates to other people's comments about accuracy of these estimates, obviously we see things several years out. We only have a vague idea. We look in generalities. But a couple of things that jumped out at me were the cost increases listed for future years for Jennings addition and renovation and the Dwight renovation, lines 45 and 62 respectively. The interesting thing is I went back and I compared what changes were in the new version of this facilities document, the Statement of Needs, versus previous ones. In the case of Dwight, in the 24-25 school year, you project an increase of 23% over what I assume was last year's number in here. The only thing that I see that's changed in terms of the statement of needs is for the renovation and upgrade of the bathrooms there, which I know for Dwight is a long-running issue, but this is the only line in here that's new for this year. And in the case of Jennings, it appears that the amount that you're projecting for the 21-22 school year, so pretty close to here, increased 80%, but there's no change in terms of the statement of needs in the facilities document.
We did. We increased, as we're getting new information about mechanical means of fresh air and numbers we're seeing, we increased those. I'm really glad you looked at it and picked up on the bathrooms, because the bathrooms at Dwight have gotten rejected several times. They have to get done. I mean,
No, I remember that from like
yeah,
15 years ago when
and
I
it's
started
really not
paying
just
attention.
even the bathrooms that are in bad shape, but it's the plumbing systems that are now 60, 70 years old and are falling apart inside the walls. So we agreed with the superintendent's help that we would get those rolled into the renovation and addition then. So we
All right.
moved the bathrooms in, we looked at some numbers for the mechanical means of fresh air and air conditioning. We looked at some of the things we're doing with IT closets now. The IT program is growing very large, and they really need their own closet in every school, not in the corner of the library's office. And
No, and I'm
So we
not
started increasing
questioning
those.
any of the details in the statement of needs. I understand the needs for all those spaces. I mean, I guess what you're saying in this case is that based on your thinking about Dwight, for example, it's, again, many years out, that it's going to cost $1.326 million to do just the bathroom renovation.
correct.
You know, those years out. And are you saying that it's your estimate for improvement in the Jennings HVAC system is going to be 80% larger than you estimated?
No,
Just-
that wasn't all the money.
That's the only change in the statement of needs document. I'm sorry, there is no change in the statement of needs document. I went back to, how far back did I go? The 14-15 version of this document, and the language is identical in it.
Yeah, I'll pull Jennings again and look at it, and I can help you with that.
I know, but all I'm
So-
saying is that this, if we're using this as a planning document, I don't want to be surprised by something that shows up $1.35 million in just a couple of years. What's the thinking behind that?
No, I'm-
It's a specific statement for just kind of a rough, air conditioning is more
I'm
expensive.
pretty
thought.
sure I increased some other items, and I'll pull that and I
Not
can
in
share it
this,
with
not in
you.
the statement of needs document.
So I'll get that to you.
All right.
I'll help you with that.
Another issue that I saw, and this goes back to an early discussion tonight, line 31 of the Walter Fitzgerald relocation. Looks like you budgeted $20,000 or $200,000 for relocation for that. So, I mean, it kind of implies that we're going to decide to relocate. I know that, obviously, we're thinking, do we renovate, do we stay? Like, it's a thing that's still in flux. I'm curious how you came up with the $200,000, and does that talk about just moving expenses for property, to desks and other things? What does that encapsulate?
No, number one, I needed a placeholder in the document, so that the other town bodies know that we're thinking about this and thinking about it hard, that we need to relocate the Walter Fitzgerald campus program. So that was number one. Number two was, the placeholder number I wanted to put in there was looking at ECC. If ECC is a viable option, what would need to be done to that area to turn it into a Walter Fitzgerald campus facility, high school facility? So then I looked at that and looked at moving costs, security, safety, the 7 bathrooms that have really small fixtures low to the ground, painting the place, signage, those kinds of things.
So it's not just moving expenses, it's billed
No,
out?
no,
for
and
the-
I have a
To
breakdown.
make it, okay.
For-
I'd like to see that, just to
Sure.
have an idea, and that may be relevant to our discussions about
Could show it to you now if you want.
Well-
I have it right here.
But
please.
can I,
Can I just make a comment to that really quick?
are you done, Mr. Peterson, or?
You can make a comment.
Okay, Mr. Asa.
I just want to reiterate that what Mr. Cullen just said, and I appreciate Mr. Peterson's question because we will want details on that 200,000, but just to confirm, that's just a placeholder
right.
to hold the place so we can start exploring that. In no way whatsoever are we making a statement tonight that we are saying we are moving Walter Fitzgerald to a specific location, moving ECC. This is purely a placeholder number and a best guess estimate that you have if we did follow that route, correct?
That's correct. And if I can remind the board, when we moved into St. Emery's, The construction project was $157,000 when we moved them in there.
Okay.
So we have to carry a number. Wherever they go,
Yeah, I don't want the public to
it
think
won't be
that.
move-in condition.
I don't want the public to think that because this number in here means that we are making some decision without discussing it and involving the public in that process.
I think that should be very clear. That doesn't mean some member of the public won't hear it, but it should be very clear that this is just a placeholder.
Some things that are clear to us, I think, should be made clear for the public.
Yes.
And that was actually, I was going to go in that direction,
Yeah.
so thank you.
Mr. Peterson, you still have comments that you want to make?
No, that covers it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Vitale and then Mrs. Gerber.
Just a couple questions about the Fairfield Woods Middle School elevator replacement project that's getting pushed back. I went back to check my notes from last year. Was this the elevator that was hard to get parts for?
Yes.
So
This
why
is,
what changed that now we're pushing it even farther?
Be happy to answer that, thank you. For some reason, Kone Elevator got an elevator installed through a building project in our district. It's the only one, so it's proprietary. So anybody that services this elevator has to go through Kone to get the parts and the material marked up, and it's becoming quite a hassle and a pain for us. It's costing us more than it should be, and we've been having a lot of trouble with it. The latest contractor that was awarded the elevator PM is Northeast Elevator. They've been able to come in and do a better job managing this PM on this elevator and keep it running, and we've had less downtime and less problems. So I was able to look at that and maybe push that item out a couple years till we can start thinking about replacing this elevator. So, which we'd like to do. We'd never want to have anybody have a proprietary system in one of our schools, and all of our contractors need to call them and be at their beck and call and mercy to try and get them to help us fix something. And we had a terrible time with Kone Elevator. In that building, the elevator was down for almost 11 weeks, and we had two children we were trying to carry up and down the stairs, get them to respond, get parts out of Texas, and a lot of trouble. And then when they got all finished, the inspector failed the elevator for a list of 3 items, and they had to work with us for another 3 weeks trying to get those 3 items fixed, and it was a mess. So we don't want that to happen.
All right, so you feel confident that's not going to be an issue? in
Not with the
foreseeable
current
future?
contractor we have, which is Northeast Elevator, and doing a fabulous job.
Okay, great. And then just for Tomlinson, for the new acoustical ceiling and lights, is that throughout the entire school, or is it just a certain portion of the school? Just address that a little bit, why that got moved.
Yeah, when Tomlinson's renovation and addition happened, the architect was allowed to use a very thin, small, what they call fine line grid. So the grid that holds all the pads in is a very fine line grid. And then the pad they used was a recessed pad, which means it's cut. And then he did in the whole corridor and a lot of the classrooms a 5-foot-long pad. And we're having some real problems in the school. Almost every classroom you walk into, there's a pad falling out, not holding itself into the grid. And they're really falling apart on us. So we're not seeing the longevity and the life we'd like to see in a typical acoustical ceiling system that we would put in. I would never put a fine line grid with a recessed pad ever in my 40 years. And this was allowed to happen there, and we can see that there's a problem. The pads are not sitting in the grid well, they're all falling out. And at some point, we're gonna have to address it.
Well, and that's why I asked, because when we toured Tomlinson, one thing that I remember from the tour was that there were no ceiling tiles in the hallway, and you could see the piping, and remember thinking this is, horrible, that kids should not have to walk through the hallway without ceiling tiles in the ceiling. So I'm surprised just to see it get moved from 2019, 2020, all the way to 2025, 2026. I mean, I would hate to think of that school being in disrepair for that long.
Yeah. I mean, it's got a ceiling system, it works, not to our satisfaction. I was so upset we even called the architect back to take a look at it. He agreed even that probably was a poor idea. To go with a narrow line grid and then a 5-foot pad is stretching it. And then anytime anyone goes in to touch it or add a wire, they're having problems. If you've ever worked with a fine line grid, it's very sensitive when you touch it. And on top of that, the pads are, instead of 2x2 or 2x4, they're 5 feet. And we're in a middle school, we don't want the pads falling out or in a classroom. So at some point, we want to address it.
And I guess it's just more cost-effective to do it at one shot as opposed to doing, say,
One time.
replacing the hallway.
And we also thought we have some roofs to finish up there. We get all the roofs done, and all the lighting program's been upgraded, and then maybe we tackle the ceilings.
Mrs. Gerber, followed by Mr. Asa.
Yeah, just really quickly, the Fairfield Ward windows, and I apologize if I've asked you about this in previous years, but it's still 2022-23 at $3.1 million, but knowing that Ludlow was $3.9 million in 2016-17, and also there's the asterisk here saying Ward does not include hazardous material testing and cleanup. I guess my concern is just, I guess I'm a little sensitive about windows after having been on Osborne Hill and Ludlow,
it's-
but I mean, is this really a number that you feel confident about, or does this have a chance to go completely off the reservation?
It does have a chance to find PCBs and go off reservation, but I'm very hesitant to put windows back in the long-range plan too, but we have windows that are single pane and failing in a lot of our schools, Tomlinson, Ward High School, elementary schools, and at some point we have to address windows. But
No, and I
the
totally
number
agree with
is,
that.
the number I used was the number we used from Fairfield Little High School just for the cost of the windows, the sills, and the replacement. It doesn't include if there's PCBs and asbestos, and all of that has to take place with it because a study would have to be done with that.
Right, and I'm trying to remember, and I didn't bring it with me tonight, but the preliminary with the chlorine testing, were there any particular areas of concern at Ward, or
Yes.
there were? Right, thanks.
Mr. Asa.
With regards to the elevator, one thing that comes to mind to me is ADA compliance and whatnot. So have we explored grants like the Community Development Block Grant to try and apply for to get that elevator? And if you could speak to any other active pursuance of grants, are we doing that? And if not, why?
Not for elevators. This is the first I would be hearing that we could look for a grant to replace an elevator.
Because I believe the RTM suggested that with one of the, I think the Woods Library.
Was it federal or state, do you remember?
Community Development Block Grant, I'm not sure, but you could look, yeah.
Community Development Block Grant does allow ADA projects.
Yeah, and an elevator to me would seem like a logical thing, so I think we should
Town would
explore
have
that.
to prioritize that because it's the town that gets that grant.
Yeah, but I think we should explore that, and if we're not, I think we should be actively exploring any other grants that we can go after for some of these things.
We are going after a lot of grants right now, a lot for security and safety. We won through the state. We're the first district in Connecticut to get reimbursement on security and safety items. We took a chance and submitted a bunch of things on the Ludlow High School window job, and they accepted them. So we're doing that. We're working on a lot of grants for energy-efficient lighting, energy-efficient controls. So we are investigating them, but this is the first I've heard of this, and I will look
And
into
as
this.
Chairman Dwyer said, that it might be something that the town has to do, but I'd like to get that dialogue started.
Thank you very much for that.
There is a specific schedule, which is pretty early, so that you should consult with the town, I think Mr. Barnhart, and say, what is the schedule for submitting projects to CDBG? And then the district, like anybody else, would have to submit the project, and whatever decision-making process the town uses to allocate their grant, we'd be subject to their final decision.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
You're done, Mr. Asa?
I am.
Ms. Vitale?
Is there just one elevator at Woods?
Oh, there's two.
There's two. That's what I thought. Thank you.
Any other
Fortunately, they're on different ends of the building, so
So there,
Any other questions
work
from board
together.
members on the facilities plan and waterfall schedule? Do we have the date yet for the waterfall, for the meeting?
Yes.
Capitals meeting?
I want to say it's September 18th, I'm guessing. I think it's September 18th. I know the town is waiting for this information. Bob Mayer was hoping I can send this after this Board of Ed meeting, because they want to start setting up their agenda, and they want to see, and they're going to want to ask me, what's the life expectancy of my non-recurrings, so they know what bonding category to put them in. So I have all that ready. to send them tomorrow.
So, Mr. Peterson, I
think it's
assume
September
you're
18th.
available for the 18th to represent the board and you know, help Mr. Cullen make whatever presentation? Okay. Any other
and-
questions?
And you asked for me to get you the breakdown for Walter Fitzgerald campus. I want me to do that through email or through the superintendent? You
Yeah,
let
get
me
it to the
know.
superintendent, she'll get it
Okay.
to the board. Mrs. Gerber?
Just one question, and I don't know if anyone here knows the answer, but the 18th is the eve of Yom Kippur. I didn't know if anyone was aware of that, if the Board of Finance was aware of that.
We should bring that to their attention.
Am I right on the date? Did anyone look it up?
It's the 18th, Tuesday, the 18th.
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
And, I mean,
Okay.
school is out on the 19th, but it begins sundown on the 18th, so I just.
I can mention it to Bob Mayer when I send him this packet
Just-
tomorrow and just
It
say,
might not matter, but I did just
Yeah.
want to.
thank you for that.
Correct. It's their decision, and Mr. Peterson, if that impacts whether you're able to attend or not, then, but I think we should bring it to their attention because we've tried to be respectful of the Jewish holidays. Any other final comments or questions from board members on this topic? No further comments. Thank you very much, Mr. Cullen.
Thank you very much.
As always, you do a very good job. You always get compliments from the Board of Finance on the materials, and they often will say they wish the town would put together a booklet and information like this on their projects.
Appreciate it.
So, thank you. I see somebody, a couple of people raising your hands. We have 2 periods of comment from the public, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end of the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, as long as you are commenting on an agenda item. Well, hopefully it won't be that long because the next items generally go a little bit quicker. So we're on item 6, to approve the minutes, that the Board of Education approve the special minutes of June 26, 2018, in the regular minutes of June 26, 2018. Do I have a motion? Mrs. Gerber, seconded by Ms. Vitale. Any question on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. It's unanimous, 9-0. Thank you very much. Superintendent's report, district priorities, and legislation update, and a general comment on work projects update.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. First of all, we did have convocation yesterday, and it was wonderful. It was a great start to the year. If you haven't had a chance to see the video that the administrators did to celebrate our teachers and everybody coming back, it was a really fun, energetic day. And we're ready for school to open. You know, you get to that point, you've been working on it all summer long, so I'm ready for school to open. Looking at the district priorities, you do have a clean copy of both the item that was sent to you today. Some of you may not have had a chance to see it. I had shared it with Mr. Dwyer and was just going to have it available for a reference, but I decided on his recommendation to send it out earlier today. You had asked in June for a cross-reference and just asked the question about how the 2015 District Improvement Plan cross-references to the work plan that we have now. So when you look at this one, what you will see inside that document, and it's towards the back is where you see the actual action items. The light blue is the work that is in the work plan for 18-19, and the dark blue was 17-18 or 16-17 work. But you can see that everything that we're doing falls right under the 2015 District Improvement Plan. The only 2 sections that were new that I added, it was either last year or the year before, was the 2 at the back, which was safety and security. I feel like that's really important to have that as part of our plan. And then I had also added over a year ago the facilities. And again, I just think that's a really important part of the school improvement. You looked at this document in June. There have been, sorry?
And these 2 were added.
Yes, on the actual, the smaller document, which is the work plan, it is correlating to our vision of the graduate, which is the presentation that you had in June. And if you look at on the educational goals, I had sent that in the message today as well. We added in the achieve and exemplify mastery of the academic expectations, which you know our high school staff has worked really hard on. That is something we're looking at all the way pre-K through 12. And then to perform at high levels in regards to social and civic expectations. And those really help frame some of the work that we're doing with Vision of Graduate. On page, let me find the right number, page 5 is where the work plan actually starts. And again, all of these items have been correlated for you, so you can see how they fit into the work that was set out in 2015. But what we did this year was to take the work plan and put that underneath those 6 tenets of Vision of a Graduate, because that really is the work and the direction in that we're moving. So you can see if an item instructionally is going to help our students become communicators and collaborators. When you look behind that on page 6, there's school and team improvement, and those 4 core areas, again, haven't changed from 2015. Leadership capacity, the number of items we're implementing, that's why it's in yellow for you, it's changed. There are 2 items on page 6 that were probably not in the version you got last Friday, and we just wanted to make sure you didn't miss those. They were, definitely one of them was in the version that you saw in June, so we're not sure what happened to that. As we were doing the cross-check, one of those had fallen off the document. Examine grading practices and homework guidelines, and that, again, came from the work of 2015. Leadership capacity, looking at the homeschool connection and understanding the purpose and value of academic expectations, and that was something, again, the board had talked about in June. How do we help parents understand what those academic expectations are? So I don't think that'll be a surprise to anybody. But the rest of it is what you saw in June, and that's it.
Okay. We approved the original district improvement plan. Similar to the long-range facilities plan, we assume it's a dynamic document and that there are small changes that are made to it from year to year by staff. And then the board said at the end of 3 years, should we take a complete new look at it and update it by vote? The board doesn't have to, but that was an open question. Probably the 2 lines here that it would be up to the chair of the policy committee to say, I really want to update policy 200 to add these 2 to the policy so that our policy and our plan are in conformance with one another. Or you can say, I'll wait until 2020 when we redo the whole document. That would be, of course, up to the policy committee to decide where they want to go with that. With that as a comment, questions from board members on the document? Ms. Jacobson, Ms. Gerber, Mrs. Maxon Connelly.
Okay, so I just went through, I'm sorry, I didn't have time to do this, so, because a crosswalk between that, because I worked off of the June 12th memo, and the one that we got in our agenda. So I just had a couple of questions on some of the changes that were added. So I'll just jump to page 5.
Yep.
One question that I had was that you added the implement the hybrid learning 9 to 11 June 22 as an item. Can you extrapolate on the term hybrid learning for me and what that means?
Yeah, and if you actually look at the crosswalk document, you can actually see in 2015 where part of the goal is to tie that technology component and learning to extended learning. And I actually had this conversation, and I think you and I might have actually even talked about it when we had our one-on-one meetings. How can we actually move forward in offering 24/7, 365 access to curriculum, especially in the summer months? We're already doing this quasi with our math program right now in high school. Paul has been utilizing this methodology where you have a math teacher that is teaching multiple different courses where they're individually paced in the summer and allowing more flexibility. And that's something we would like to see moving forward in the future, is to expand that.
So personalized learning during the school year.
It's not personalized learning. Hybrid learning means it's a hybrid between face-to-face and online learning, but what it's not is what we've been doing, which is when we've utilized online learning in the past, we've utilized a platform. I almost said Astellas, and that's not the right brand that we use. Which one? Edmentum, thank you. Which means it's more of a package curriculum. We really want our teachers, our curriculum behind whatever we do so that it matches what's happening in the classroom.
Okay.
That's what hybrid means. Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to understand that. And I had caught those 2 things that had fallen off, so that was going to be 2 of the questions that I was curious about that. Sorry, I'm trying to go page by page here. Okay, so page 6, sorry, page 6. Solidify social and civic expectations for all 17 sites in the ECC, June of 2020. I know that we're working on, we just finished the academic expectations, right? So for June 2018, and then we're going to be working on this social and civic expectations. Is there a reason why that is June 2020? I thought just for the incoming 8th graders as they entered into high school next year, that would be kind of a year after they've entered, and if there was any impact on that being delayed to June 2020.
Yeah, the discussion that we've had on that, and I think we even had it when we had our presentation for Vision of the Graduate, is that this is not intended to be a rubric like the academic expectations. Both of our high schools very much have that culture and climate piece worked out. It's different in each building. At our elementaries, you're going to see things like restorative practices, which are already in place. It's really just saying, here's what we do to meet this, and here's how we're approaching it our building. This component is going to be much more, what I would say, building specific according to the climate and culture of the building.
Okay. Thank you. And then just the last question I have is on the student performance indicators on the back.
Yeah.
And obviously some of them are just easier to kind of
Yeah.
envision as a performance indicator, but I was just curious if you could explain a little bit more on the school climate. I feel like school climate can encapsulate so many different topics and areas. Is there something specific that you're looking at in terms of that kind of a metric, or is this a broad term that would encapsulate many different issues?
This is actually the required school climate assessment that we have to do every other year. I would say the one thing we are looking at, overwhelmingly our principals have said the tool we're not using is probably as effective as the one we used the first year. And part of that is just that the tool we used the first year we could benchmark with other high-performing districts across the country. But there is a cost to that. We will be looking at that again, whether or not that's something we can think about this year. But this is the year. We'll be doing it again at the end of the year.
So it's many different.
It's actually a very large instrument. I can actually show you if that would be helpful for the board.
Okay, thank you so much. That was it.
Mrs. Gerber.
Yeah, I just had some questions regarding the Innovative Learning Initiative, and this ties into the Chromebook program that's starting up in 7th grade and 9 through 12. And I do know that we're going to have a presentation on this at the September 25th meeting, but I just had a few questions here, and if they can't be answered tonight, that's fine. I just was curious about a few general things here. I guess one thing I was just curious about is exactly how many Chromebooks have we ordered? Do we have a number? And I apologize if we were given that number. I know we got a couple of memos, but I don't recall seeing an actual number of how many devices we ended up getting.
Yeah, I'll ask Ms. Burns. I think you probably have that with you. Do you have we have a pre-purchase number, and then we also have the money that we use for replacement of devices. So if you're looking at the what is the number for the pre-purchase, which was the 403, and that is actually at the bottom of the memo we gave the board, and I did bring a copy of that, actually.
Hi, Nancy Burns, Director of Information Technology for the district. We bought 3,983 Chromebooks for students. That included the pre-purchase, the 3,000, as well as some expenditures for replacement equipment from 17-18, and a small amount from what we had planned to do for 18-19. And I think we delineated that in the memo that was distributed.
Okay, yeah, I just wasn't, because I guess my question is just because we have approximately 3,000 high school students, and the 7th grade class is about 900 students.
Right, that's why 3,983.
Right, but I know that there's been a lot of talk about, loaners, when students don't have charged devices, if something's lost, if something's broken. So how many loaners did we get?
We bought 30 for each middle school and 50 for each high school, although some of the ones that are at the high school were actually older equipment that we no longer need for various programs. They're also Chromebooks. They're just a different version.
Okay. And so, and we're not concerned about possibly running out at some point, like if there's like a rash of people who neglect to charge
We certainly hope not.
Okay.
We also bought additional chargers just to have, and the dog ate my charger, that kind of thing.
Got
so
it.
we can replace those too.
I imagine that will happen. And then I guess another question I had is just in terms of, because with this large increase, do we need to have additional technical support, additional staffing, or will there just be additional time taken up? Because I would imagine that, in terms of support and then also repair, that there may be an increase in that based on
In the
the
research that I did with other districts that have gone to one-to-one with similar devices, they haven't had to add additional staff to support them, especially in the first year, because most of the things would be warranty repair. I mean, there will be exceptions to that. The Chromebook that the child's coming off the bus and trips, and the screen gets cracked, that kind of thing, or they spill coffee on it. We're really accustomed to handling that kind of break-fix work internally. Whether the volume actually impacts us or not, we'll keep very close track of that and let you know if we feel there's an impact. These devices are, I'll call them lightweight devices. They're not as complex as the full functional laptops and the MacBook Pros that we've been using in the district. So they are not as sensitive to being kind of tossed around in the backpack and that sort of thing. Other districts have not seen a very large amount of them come back for problems.
Okay.
So.
Well, I guess to that point, talking about how they're pretty hardy. I know that in middle school they do get a cover, and that it's recommended that all devices get a cover. So that means that the high school students will be responsible for buying their own covers.
That was the decision of the group, yeah.
Okay, and then I guess my question would be, what happens if people don't get covers? Is that
the only thing we ask the students not to do is decorate their Chromebooks.
okay?
If the middle school children, we had a feeling they would decorate them anyway. So, and middle school kids being middle school kids, I had 3 sons, so I've been through that a few times. We thought a cover was important, and they're allowed to decorate the cover.
Right, I saw that. Okay, and then I guess one other thing here. So it says no internet access at home. If you don't have internet access at home, you should notify your child's principal. There are several options available. What are those options?
The one that we're focused on is something called Kajit. It's a partnership with Verizon. It allows basically a hotspot, if anybody's familiar with the little brick hotspots that are done, that the district can fund, or we are actually going to ask the Fairfield Foundation for a grant for that once we get an idea of like how many kids are involved. And it allows filtered internet access. So we can time it. We can make sure they're not on Netflix. We can make sure they're going to bed by 11 o'clock. Well, I can't make them go to bed, but I can make sure they're not on the Chromebook. So that's what we're focused on. I've actually been working with CES to see if we can get a regional grant going.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that Norwalk is doing something, and they have something with Sprint.
They did something with Sprint. Our experience with Sprint coverage in Fairfield, my sister and I have gone through, I think, 3 reviews for cell phone coverage here. Sprint just doesn't cut it.
And then another question, it says at the, starting at grade 9, start of the 18-19 school year, and grades 10, 11, and 12 during the fall or spring. Is that?
They're actually all being done in September.
But they all are all being done, okay, because this is just from the website.
But let me clarify that. We did a staggered rollout on purpose, because if you watch any other districts, we have a rollout schedule, and it says when we're rolling out, because we want to make sure that everything is working really, really well. So we started with freshmen. By our plan, if we're able to continue by the end of September, and actually I think it's first week in October by the time we have the last middle school, but that's if everything's going really, really well. We wanted to go slow and very careful.
Thank
Okay.
you.
And then just, our school's Wi-Fi is going to be able to handle all of
The
this?
Wi-Fi that at the high schools were both upgraded, and I think, let me think, Ward was done in 2016, Ludlow in 2017. We did the 3 middle schools this summer. The design was for every person in the building, which was the head count for staff and the head count for students, to be able to be walking around with 3.5 devices and be able to connect simultaneously. In addition to that, you may remember that we were able to get the town to bond our local area network switches. That gives us more bandwidth once the device connects to the wireless access point, which is the little thing that's in the ceiling. It has to connect back to the switch in the closet, which in turn goes out to the internet. And we've been able to upgrade all 5 secondary schools this summer with those as well. So we've really improved our pipe. Last summer, we also created 2 separate circuits at the high schools. So the schools that link off of them. So if you think regionally, so I don't have to go through the whole list of 17 schools with you.
No,
Ward and Ludlow, where the hub sites and the other schools fall off of them, they have independent connections to the Connecticut Education Network. So we've really done a lot of pre-planning to be able to support whether it was BYOD or innovative learning and every kid having a device of one sort or another to be able to make sure we're using that capacity. The 3-year technology plan called for a lot of this work because the long-term goal wasn't about the devices, it was about using resources online because we felt that that was the way instruction was going. It allows us to be more flexible. It allows the resources to be more timely and up to date. It helps those parents who can get concerned about the 50 pounds of books in the backpack. So there was a lot of planning involved in this.
Okay, and then just one last question, I think. This student pledge for Chromebook use, somebody asked me, is this like an actual pledge that students need to take and sign, or is this just kind of guidelines?
I think it's a handbook, if I can you speak to that, Dr. Jones?
Well, they have it, I think they have it planned in through their digital citizenship because they have actual, like, mini classes planned for middle school and high school, and they want the students to understand how to take care of their Chromebook. One of the big problems we have when kids don't have their own Chromebook is they like to do things like pull the keys off. When it's their own Chromebook and they're on the same device all the time, they tend to take better care of them, but they're going to make sure that kids also know what they should and shouldn't do. And that's, all of our schools are doing the exact same things for digital citizenship, so that's part of that.
But it's not something they need to like sign or something.
I don't know if they're actually going to have them sign it or not. I mean, we can certainly follow that up. I know they're going to go through it with the kids.
I was asked and
Yeah.
so, okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on the document? Mrs. Gerber? No, okay. Mrs. Maxon Cannelli.
Just one follow-up to a point Mrs. Gerber made and regarding tech support for kids. There are going to be a lot of questions as simple as the machine are, and just one suggestion through the chair to the back of the room where our headmasters are. One thing that we had done in my district was, for example, they weren't National Honor Society students doing service, but it were very tech-savvy kids, and we set up a help desk in the media center.
Yeah,
so that every block of the day, student had a student to go to because the demand and the issues were wide-ranging, and the vast majority, all right, I'm going to speak for myself. I couldn't help the kids, so I won't speak for my peers, but it was very helpful to be able to say, go to the help desk. And they could just be very simple little things, but beyond the turn it off and back on again and it might be fixed, it would help to have someone always available so a student doesn't get stumped.
And thank you for the support. That actually is a department goal this year, is to work with the instructional staff to set up a Genius Bar or a help desk run by students in each of the buildings. We had the opportunity to go to ISTE in June, which is the International Society for Technology Educators Conference, and we saw a terrific presentation by a group that is not only doing that, but the children that participate in that Genius Bar actually get certified by their vendor. In our case, it would be HP. These people happen to use Dell, and Microsoft on their products. And we're actually talking to Google as well about getting the kids some kind of certification they can take with them into the job market. So that's our kind of long-term goal for that.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. Oh, no, those aren't, but thank you very much. My other questions were, first, two statements and then a question. One, I would hope, because I had no time to go over the new document, which really puts the district improvement plan that we voted on, side by side with this, to the chair, I would hope we could have this as a discussion item for one more meeting, because I would like the time to really go through this much more carefully. And second to that is that I also do believe, Dr. Jones, I saw in the email, referenced, that the issue of voting on this, and I do think that would be appropriate. Again, this was, something that the board needs to own and be committed to. This involves finances, time, resources, and all of that. And so I would hope we could have one more meeting, at least one more meeting to discuss, because I know there's a lot here for me to go through, and also because I do believe it should be a voting item. That's just my opinion. But the last point, I want to get back to a question Mrs. Jacobson had asked, which was on page 8 of the enclosure 6, the student performance indicators, 8 key measures. I just want to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding this, because in The district improvement plan we voted on, we had 10 pages. Now granted, that is much more widely spaced because it had numbers, but we had 10 pages of baseline data and targets. Are you recommending to the board that that be scrapped in favor of just these bullet points on page 8?
What I'm recommending to the board, yes, in that the presentation that we did for you last fall, we had great feedback from the board because it was very much tied to teaching and learning. And one of the struggles, and I shared this with the board when I was first here, when you start looking at things like how many students are in activities after school, and you're trying to calculate and keep up with that, if we have people hand calculating for hours after school, the idea that that's actually great data is probably not accurate. And we don't have a system right now for that, and that's a matter of priorities. Our world language assessment that we got back last year, nobody could figure out why the scores were what they were. We would be happy to put those back in here if the scores come back where we can understand them. And literally, the World Language Department still did not know why they were showing up so different than the year before. And we don't know if it was something with the company, but if we feel better about them this year, we'll report those in the fall. But I didn't want to commit to them because they weren't accurate. So graduation rate was really looking at the cohort. And if you remember, in the last 2 years, the state has changed the report and how they're reporting on our data. And so this more closely aligns with the information we also get from the state. This also, when you look at the STAR growth, which we presented to the board again in the fall, it was iReady when this was first put out. Some of the assessments have changed. We'll have a new science assessment, the NGSS, that's going to be brand new for us. So part of it is just natural change from 2015.
Yeah, and that's where I completely support the idea. I mean, and we knew that this wasn't going to be perfect as is, and that once it was actually rolled out that there could be some issues. But I also know that we had really been committed to the idea, and this was coming from the staff, that not everything was going to be test related. You know, that there were other things that were important to, I mean, the one that immediately comes to mind is I can't remember how to phrase this, the enrollment of non-typical students in electives. And that was just one, but that was one that was generated by staff. And so that's, again, something I would like to have a little bit more time to, I just wanted to confirm first my understanding that those 10 pages became these 8 bullet points, because I do think that that's something the board needs to discuss a little bit more. Completely agreeing with you that some of the things that we had picked in, good interest of the improvement of the district aren't feasible anymore. Perfect example, those extracurriculars, but I would like these 9 people to, really take another look at those and see, yes, or maybe we'd like to consider others.
Yeah, and I might just add, for me, I just want to make sure the data that I bring the board, I can bring in good faith as well, and that was important.
I wonder if it might make sense to make a full board discussion go a little bit smoother, whether the policy committee and finance committee said, let's look at these, my memory was about 18 measurements with about 3 or 4 subgroups within each of the 18, and take a look at, here's what we said, here's what is being proposed, so that at least some of you might come to the meeting with some advanced discussion on that specific topic.
I would have no problem with the idea. I don't get the policy connection aside from the one that Dr. Jones already referenced.
It's a poetic license use of committees to help make the 9 of us work more efficiently. But no, it's not a direct, with the exception of the 2 policy issues that are in Policy 200. So it's a poetic license use of committees.
But I do see that, the Finance Committee might have some input on the financial implications of some of these changes as well, but.
And I might make a suggestion that what I can do is try to crosswalk the old data to the new data, just so you can see. I just didn't do that section because so much of it wasn't relevant, but let me go back in and look at that, and then I can add that for the board. So you can see what we were assessing, like iReady, that's no longer available. Now we're doing STAR, and we're doing STAR K-12 instead of just, elementary, for instance.
Right, but we should be getting an update on this.
Oh, you're getting,
regardless.
You'll get an update just like you did last fall.
Right.
Yeah, it's already on the schedule, and Mr. Cummings is working on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's Let's see, was there anybody over here that raised their hand? Okay, so Mrs. Jacobson, followed by Ms. Vitale.
Just piggybacking on Jessica Gerber's comments on the innovative learning, I know that you had mentioned that we were going to get a presentation on that in September. Is that at the 11th or the 25th meeting?
25th.
Okay, so on the September 25th meeting. And I'll reserve most of my questions for that period, but I'm hoping that some of the questions that board members had asked back in January during budget season on the Chromebook initiative will be answered and addressed in that presentation. So would it be helpful if we reiterate those questions that were asked back in January to specific staff members so that it's included? Or do we have a good idea that you remember?
Yes, it would be helpful to save them from researching through all the budget
Okay.
discussions.
Okay. And the only thing that I wanted to ask tonight, just because before school starts, because I know there's been just a few questions on, first on the memo, thank you for bringing a copy of it, because I didn't bring my copy. But it says that the devices were $203 a piece, but in our budget questions, it was $244 with the license. So did these additional ones also come back at $245? Sorry to make you come back up to the table. I should have said hang on
It
there.
makes it worthwhile coming.
Huh? Yeah.
The original budget number that we used was the number that we were purchasing last year, which was $244.
Right.
When I started negotiating, and actually Dr. Jones helped to negotiate with the vendor.
Okay.
We basically pit two of them against each other, so we basically got the sharpened pencil. So we pay $179 currently for the book itself, and there's a $24 fee for the management license that allows them to basically belong to Fairfield schools. So if a child or somebody else steals one and tries to basically wash it, is what they call it, back to default,
Oh.
so they can try to use it, they won't be able to because it's assigned to us. As
Okay.
a matter of fact, as an example of that, they accidentally shipped us one that belonged to another district, and we can't do anything with it. We have to return it and get a different device in return.
Okay, thanks so much. And there was some different information at different high schools being done with people who perhaps have their own and want to bring their own device. That's still allowed, obviously, right?
Yeah, we don't prohibit people from bringing their own device in. I will say that there are some advantages to using the Chromebook instead. Obviously, to a teacher, it's a lot easier if everybody in the classroom is using the same device because they can be consistent with instruction, what kinds of things people have to go to or what kids have to go through. The other piece with it is that if they're on their own device, they're using what we call the bring your own device part of the network. Right now, that doesn't have as much capacity on it as the district devices do, because obviously we want our district devices to have priority. If you think about the pipes I was talking about before, so where the connections between the devices and the network are, they're carved into what we call virtual local area networks. I'm sorry, starting to get technical.
No,
just
it's
me.
fine, it's fine.
But in the wireless area, we have it divided into three parts. So there's a guest network, which many of you use when you're using your iPads or your phones in district. That has the least capacity. The next one is the BYOD, and the next one is what we call FPS Wi-Fi, which is for all our district devices. The district devices automatically log into all of that. We have that on purpose because, for example, if we're doing SBAC testing across the school, we want to make sure we would never let a child use their own device for that because we have to lock the browser down. There's all sorts of rules and regulations revolving around that. So we obviously want to give more bandwidth to our own devices than somebody who's porting theirs around. That being said, we haven't had an issue where a child said they couldn't get onto BYOD at this point, but we have that capacity, that management tool to what we call carve the network up the way we want to.
Okay. I just wanted to make it clear that if they wanted to, they can still do that, right? And then the last thing I had was we were told that for replacement or for damages, or you're going to go to the library or the library media center, and that's where you're going to get your help during the day. And take a loaner out if you need a repair done, etc. So a question was, there's no fee, correct, for replacement at this point?
this
that
point,
the district is just replacing?
that being said, I'm sure if there was some kind of egregious situation, we would treat it like any other situation where the dean would get involved and there would be a conversation with the family, just like there is with any other kind of school damage that happens. But right now, we don't expect to charge people for that kind of work. And part of that is developing what the capacity for Fairfield is. What kind of damage are we going to see? What kind of break fix are we going to see? Are we going to have some specific kinds of issues that we can't anticipate?
That was my next question. How are you, did you put systems in place already at each of these schools for logging the visits to technical repair,
Yes,
damage, replacement?
We actually have a Google form that we're going to give kids access to so they can fill it out. They don't have to use their Chromebook to fill it out, obviously, because the Chromebook isn't working. But there's still devices across the buildings. We haven't gotten rid of any of the specialty labs. We're still going to have desktops and Macs in the libraries. So a student can go there, fill out the form. The form's going to be attached to their device. And then that device is going to be basically triaged by the school technician. Some of the library staff is probably going to get smart about things too. Is it a charging problem? Is it something we were talking about before, that kind of the rudimentary kinds of things that kids, one of the things we noticed when we passed them out to the 9th graders at Ludlow last week was kids were pressing the on button over and over again as opposed to just pressing it and giving the machine time to go through its motions. So they were saying, it's not working. And we said, stop pushing the button, push it, and just be patient for a second, and then it would come up.
Okay, so
it's
you're
little things like
tracking
that. So-
damages, replacements.
Yes,
You have a system.
we have a multitude of practices in place to do that. Both tracking the child saying that their machine isn't working, to tracking if a child comes in and gets a loaner because they left theirs at home. Those get checked out through the library circulation desk.
Is
that it? Or not?
No, I have one more.
Oh, sorry.
So in just reading through the guidebook, most of this there's a lot more that I'm gonna talk about when you do your presentation, but just the last thing, the sticker that comes with it?
Are you talking about the camcorder sticker?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that because the camera's remotely accessible?
Well, in theory, all of them are remotely accessible. If you've listened to the news over the last 5 years, there have been all sorts of ways that people have figured out how to hack into cameras. Some vendors have used them, maybe surreptitiously, depending on what you believe in the newspaper. We just felt it was a good practice, a teachable moment for students to say, if you're not using the webcam to do a Skype meeting or communicate with a friend, you probably should keep a cover on it just to protect your privacy. And that's what that was really all about.
Okay, so they're gonna get all those lessons in class on the importance of that sticker.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. That's it for me right now.
Ms. Vitale, followed by Ms. Leeper.
Do you foresee needing any additional staff to monitor just online usage? Now we're giving devices to every high schooler. Do you foresee any problems with that, or just to kind of keep track of what they're going to be on, accessing at home?
I mean, the responsibility for what is going on at home with these devices is really up to the parent. There's nothing on those devices that's going to filter what your child does at home, other than what you currently have with your personal home network. As far as what happens at school, we have many tools in place. We have filters in place. We have alerting systems in place. Most of the kids that have ever tried to do something have found out the hard way what we have in place. So we have many tools of the trade to take care of that. And also say that although it sounds like a lot of devices, we already had over 8,000 devices active in the district. So it's not like we're really exponentially adding. We're slowly but surely matriculating into this device per child, as opposed to hauling out the carts full of stuff that was somewhat cumbersome for both the kids and the staff.
I guess my concern is more just liability, that what students are accessing at home on district-owned equipment. If that
Yeah.
matters.
That's why when we have user policies and things that govern that, what we are going to do is do some parent workshops, because to be honest, most of our kids, especially our high school kids, have one of these. And these are 10 times more powerful. They can take pictures in the bathroom. They can do all kinds of things easily that they're not going to do on our device that is the $180 device. But the parent education piece, I think, is really important, because, you know, we'll have parents that don't really know how to monitor their child's usage. And now that we have Mr. Hanahan's position, that's something that he has on his radar this year. And we had a great example. It was at our DLT, I think, where, you know, one of the principals was sharing about how he monitors his own child's usage and turns off their house network to the kids, you know, every night at like 8 o'clock when it's dinner time, and that's it. But most people in the room, you know, probably wouldn't know how to do that. And so we're going to make sure we're also helping parents with some of those tools.
And one more, just about cell phones. In the past, you know, kids were allowed to use their cell phones often in class because it was a tool to access the internet for learning. Now that we are giving children that access, do you foresee any potential changes in cell phone policy within the classroom? Because I know there's some inconsistencies between classes and between the high schools. And not, if you don't have an answer, that's fine, but I think that it just kind of opens up a lot of other questions.
I think we have a cell phone policy. Is that correct?
Internet use. And then we have BYOD, cell phone policy.
Yeah, cell phones, though, I mean, every student, obviously, I mean, most of them have them now. I will say, we're giving it lots of thought. And Ludlow put actually the cell phone, I don't know what you call them, holders, in every classroom last year, and really trialed that as a whole school. And Ward was mixed. It was more by teacher choice. But we'll be having all of those conversations. And part of that is, as we go forward, having a different type of access. Having the Chromebooks there means you don't have to use the phone to, you know, if you're wanting to do a poll or something. So it will be helpful for teachers.
And kids are returning these at the end of the school year. They're not, are they keeping them? Like,
We're really discussing that, and, you know, we're fortunate in that several of us have been in districts where, because we're not new to this game. We're one of the later school districts, so we get to learn from everybody else. One thing is, if you have something like hybrid learning and we're really growing and giving kids opportunities in the summer, it may very well be that you're going to want kids to keep those devices in high school, at least the students who are engaged in learning in the summer, because if we grow in hybrid learning opportunities, I can guarantee you we could end up with 60% of our kids wanting to take just that one class to get it off their schedule in the summer, so it opens up an elective in the fall. Those will be growing areas for us. So we're gonna be watching that all year long and make that decision at the end of the year.
We also found that the other districts that we surveyed, at least on an anecdotal level, said that many of them didn't do the take-home for the first year, but then after they went through the logistics of the collecting, and then some of the missed opportunities, as Dr. Jones was saying, for extended learning in the summer, they changed their policy and let the kids keep them over the summer, unless, of course, they were leaving the district, and it actually worked out really well. They found the kids were very engaged. They were more on top of their work. It helped them with some of the summer packet things that they were asked to do. So, again, we haven't made that decision yet, but I think there's a lot of things to be discussed.
That's one.
She has one more.
One more. These are just like logistical, which don't necessarily like play into what we're getting on the 25th. Mrs. Gerber referenced that Norwalk is rolling it out, and I think that if families purchase insurance at the end of the 4 years, they would get to keep the device. And I guess just moving forward, do you foresee when you would want to replace these devices? Has that entered the end?
Yeah, we basically have a sketched out plan. We expect the devices to last for basically a high school career for about 4 years. We may find that's better. Google has an actual mandated, they don't support them anymore kind of policy, so Chromebooks sort of, I don't want to say they're dead in the water, but they don't allow them to be updated with the latest software and the protection systems after a certain time frame. So roughly speaking, that's in the 4 to 5 year time frame. They changed it once a quarter. It's been a very hot topic among tech directors in the state, because many of them, because they've done this years before, are now confronting the fact that they have all these machines coming due and that aren't going to be able to be updated soon. We're not in that position at this point, thankfully, so we can learn from them.
Thank you.
Ms. Lieber.
I just have only one question for you and then one for Dr. Jones. I don't know if I missed something. Are 8th graders getting Chromebooks?
No, 7th grade and 9 through 12.
Okay, so what is happening with our 8th graders?
The 8th graders are, just like the 6th graders, are not getting Chromebooks at this time. But without revealing too much ahead, I suspect that you'll see us requesting them for next year, so.
It's in
by
the work
time-
plan,
Yeah,
actually, yeah.
yeah. 6th, 7th, and 8th will be covered. Actually, the 7th graders would take theirs to 8th grade next year. We'd backfill new children, that sort of thing.
And if I might just jump in too, because I think you're probably thinking, well, why 7th grade? Well, part of it is in middle school, it's driven by, there's a lot of professional development that goes into this, and working with the 3 middle school principals and the teams. 7th grade really wanted to be the ones to start to implement in middle school and work out the kinks, but it doesn't mean, and I think it's important for parents to know that 8th grade doesn't have access. As Nancy said, we've had 8,000 devices around the district. They're still going to have plenty of access. They'll be prepared for high school, but it's on the old model. But it really was driven by staff. And 7th grade really committed. I mean, all last year, they were working on preparing just to have, they were working to have carts in their rooms. But that's, lots of effort has gone into that.
Thank you. And then just to go back to the district improvement plan, page 8, the list of student performance indicators, just kind of something to think about, building off what Miss Maxon Kennelly said about staff not wanting all of them to be exam driven, and then also talking about data that's readily available. I know that the state collects like the career and technical education data from our students, and they look at depth within like a category, and that could be a separate topic entirely, but it is usually an access point for kids who aren't doing necessarily APs or those types of courses to also meet some of these indicators. Thank you.
Any other questions on the district improvement plan? So I would ask the 2 committee chairs to let me know whether you want to take up the issue of, let's look at the side-by-side comparison, just so that you might give guidance to the board when it comes back on the agenda. And if you're not going to do that, fine, it doesn't matter to me, just that it might be helpful to know that. If there are no other conversation, if the board will indulge me for a moment, do we?
I'm sorry, is the superintendent's report over?
No, not at the
okay,
moment.
okay.
Let me continue talking. Other than the 2 people who have been raising their hands, do we have any other members of the community that want to speak? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thank you. Just so that I can kind of time it. Educational legislation update, I think that's Mrs. Deasy.
Yes, Ms. Deasy is just going to highlight 3 items for you tonight, and you do have the whole packet. If there's something else, you can email her after, but she didn't want to do just the items that didn't have large impacts for us.
So in the packet on the first page, you'll see the restraint and the seclusion update. I was able to touch briefly on all 3 of these points in policy committee earlier this evening, and we will be looking at this particular update ourselves. We need to modify our existing policy by January 1st. Mostly what has changed in the legislation is definitions and some wording around the definition of seclusion specifically, and whether or not a student can be secluded as part of a planned IEP or behavior intervention plan. That can no longer be planned. It has to be something that happens somewhat organically, and is not something that the team has decided to use as a planned intervention. So we'll be updating our policy accordingly for that. The second is the student data privacy update. This has updated the existing legislation on student data privacy in the state of Connecticut. We've been working very closely with our outside counsel on making sure that we are in compliance with this going into the school year. It was effective July 1st, and we've been working very hard to make sure that we have the correct contract addendums in place with all of our vendors, and that we've communicated appropriately with our parents via the website. And the last one is the guidelines for life-threatening food allergies. That one's on page 5 in your packet. That one essentially says that we need to train all of our bus drivers to administer allergy medication, epinephrine, by the end of the school year, by June 30th, 2019, and that we also need to allow students to self-carry their medication in school. So we'll be updating our policy on that as well.
Any questions for Ms. Deasy? Mr. Asa?
With regards to the bus drivers, is there anything that will be changed? I mean, we just signed a new contract, so is that something contractual that will come into play or anything like that?
It's something that we are under the impression that First Student is already working on, so it shouldn't affect our contract, no.
Any other questions on the educational, the legislation update, Mrs. Maxon Cannelli?
And I apologize for not asking you this in committee, but on the second to last page, the study of the search and seizure of students' personal electronic devices. Do you know any of the background behind what prompted this? I know when we did internet use as a policy, we spent a lot of time on this as an issue, what gives the district the right, et cetera. Do you know what was driving this one? Are you familiar with the
I
background?
don't know that, and I can try to find the answer for you for policy committee if that makes sense.
Sorry about that. All right, thank you.
And that might be a question that we could direct to one of our state reps to ask for the backstory of.
Thank you.
Anything else on the legislative update? If not, we'll move on to summer work projects.
We'll invite Mr. Colin Ford again. I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief update on the turf field because I've been emailing the board on that, and I know you've received emails on that as well. So just looking at the timeline, first of all, so that everybody understands, when we last summer got the bid, by the time it went through the bid process and the town handles that component for us, it was already late July. Mr. Collin, you probably know the date. But it was too late for us to install the turf field last year unless we did want to close that field September, and I think it was towards the end of October. And that was not an option, which we can definitely see this year was not an option. When we got to this summer, working on the bid in May and beginning of June, what came in, the scoreboards from our athletic director at Ward and also Mr. Ebling, and he actually just left. She was still here, but they did not feel like it was going to be palatable to the community at all because it was basically a scoreboard that I would reference more like a Little League field. It didn't have the name of, the high school on it. It was not adequate. So at that point, we looked at the scoreboards and added the additional boards. And Mr. Collin, correct me if I'm wrong, there were about 12 ads in this project, and we were doing 11 of the 12, but it's significant. It's a big project. When we ordered those scoreboards to make sure that they were going to be there for decades and be okay, with our community, it did mean, and we knew that the entire project was not going to be done until the end of September. And so as we went into the summer, we did ask the Sprint Turf, who's handling this as the general contractor, we did ask Sprint Turf to put off the track. So then when can we get the field, which would be the middle of September? That's where we are right now. And I think the frustration for the community is that they were doing a lot of work in June, even right into the first part of July. And they dug out like the long jump, pole vault. You saw work happening. All the turf was ripped out. And then it kind of just set. And I think that's what has been the frustrating part. Behind the scenes, we're working with them, talking to them daily, Mr. Collin is. They had their concrete person actually quit, the subcontractor, so they were trying to find somebody to come in and finish the pits that had been dug, as well as they were having trouble with their electrician. So Mr. Collin gave them references for electricians and concrete folks that we use. They're actually using one of our concrete contractors, and they're supposed to be on site tomorrow. And to get the pits finished, they say it's going to take probably 5-6 days. The turf company has said they're going to be on site next week, that they are going to get that job done. We are really still hoping they're going to meet their timeline and have us on that field in the middle of September. It does not take that long to put a turf field in unless we're weather, if we get some huge big storms and things like that. But right now, while we're we're frustrated with them because we want it to go faster. They are still within their timeline and the governing timeline. They did do the Tomlinson Field last year, finished 3 weeks early. They've done a lot of work in the town, but this project is significant and it is different than projects they've handled in the past for us because it's not just turf. They are a turf company, but right now they're dealing with concrete and electrical work. The scoreboards could come later. Our main goal right now is to get our kids on the field in September. So it would not surprise me if the scoreboards are all the way into the first or second week of October because we're installing, was it 4 different boards?
Yeah, and there's, because of the increase in the size of the scoreboards from the generic brand they submitted, it needs more structural steel on the columns that are in the site. And I don't know how many of you know, but the baseball and softball scoreboard is an old swivel system. It's a single column, and you used to swivel by pushing a button, but now you do it manually. But I believe it's from the 50s or 60s. It's no longer working, and the engineer recommended to do 2 fixed scoreboards. So we're going to eliminate this swivel program to try and make the softball and baseball work and put 2 fixed scoreboards and then add a soccer scoreboard where the soccer is going to be relocated onto the grass field. So it's a total of 4 scoreboards. The original bid had 15 ad alternates. One of them was the baseball and softball scoreboard. We couldn't fund it with the non-recurring money. So if you remember, we put it in the Board of Ed operating budget. It got approved. So that's what started the conversation in May with the company about all the scoreboards. We first had to prove that they were going to hold their price that was originally in the bid, and then I had to work with the purchasing department to make sure we could do that with the original bidder, and then add the soccer scoreboard. And when those submittals came in, they used very generic brand scoreboards. It didn't have our name on it. It had, instead of highlighted the school names, that just said home and visitor. And we collectively met with the superintendent and the headmaster and said, spending this kind of money and moving forward over the next 20, 25 years, it would be a disgrace to put in a generic brand scoreboard. So we upgraded the scoreboards. That pushed the schedule out, and then the rest of the summer, all kinds of things happened with their concrete sub. He wasted 3 weeks trying to get them on site. I finally recommended 3 companies that are already approved and did work for us, and he's actually using one of those companies.
Tom, I think in the essence
So,
of time, because we're kind of
all of that.
repeating, we might
Yep.
just take a few questions on this project.
And I'll say that
Yeah.
for the benefit of the public who is here,
Yeah.
about 20 of 11, we ought to stop with this overall topic so that we can get the public up here. I think, Mr. Asa, you had your hand up. and Ms.
I want to
Pit-
move this meeting,
Pitko?
I want to move the meeting along, so I'll hold my questions.
Okay. Ms. Pitko?
I was just curious what our athletes have been doing in the meantime.
They have a practice schedule, and that was worked out in the summer. When we messaged on August 10th, Mr. Ebling and Mr. Fry did about where they're practicing. When it gets more, it probably has had a bigger even impact on the small kiddo programs that use the turf fields and areas because we've pushed them off for Park and Rec. But they have a practice schedule. It's certainly not as good as being on their own field, but
We fixed the grass field. The
Yeah.
grass field was in the budget to do all the irrigation over and then reseed it. That's all been done. That went very well. A new pump and everything. So that's working on the site.
Ms. Vitale, you had your hand up?
When Spinturf submitted their bid, did they name their subcontractors that they were going to be using?
Yes.
Okay. And for the scoreboards, forgive me if you said this, have they been delivered? Are we still?
No.
No. Do we know when we could expect them?
The
Or we-
delivery date from Nevco Scoreboard Company, their sub, was August 15th. They are crated and ready to be delivered. The problem is that the subcontractor Sprint Turf hired Shock Electric subcontractor to do the electric for the scoreboards and the steel, which is very odd to me, but
Okay.
the steel shop drawings got approved by Nevco on August 10th. So they don't want to ship the scoreboards in crates sitting on the site waiting for the electrician to start and get the steel installed.
Okay.
So that's why the scoreboards haven't been delivered. But once they get all coordinated, the structural steel, the electrical, and the scoreboards will all go together as one piece.
So it's not a question of like we're waiting for them and they're not here. It was a decision that we're just not ready to accept delivery until the electrical work is
Although
done.
we had
And
to-
we've actually had trouble this summer just keeping people off the field where we were doing work, jumping over where the locks were. So we were not very confident that if they were just sitting there, that we wouldn't have people jumping on them. And
Okay, just really wanted clarification that when you're ready for them to be installed, they'll be ready to ship, that we're not looking at a shipping delay
Correct.
there.
Right.
Okay,
They're in
thank you.
crates ready to go.
Mrs. Maxon Connelly, followed by Mr. Peterson.
Through the chair, Mr. Cullen, I guess one of the things that's very frustrating is that because the last timeline I had ever seen for this was the 90 days from the last summer, and I accept that the project has grown in scope, and I think it's going to be something we're very proud of when it is done. Hard to see that point right now, but, just holding on to it. But I guess here's one thing I'm unclear on. If we knew all along that we wouldn't have access to the turf field till the end of September, then why did all of the changes and the notification to the teams, et cetera, not happen till the second week of August?
Well, we didn't know all along that there was a change. We knew June 23rd when we submitted all of the scoreboards. That's when Sprint Turf got back to us and said, this is a major change. We've lost 7 weeks. This could affect the schedule. But we had to get pricing from them. We had to get confirmation that they were going to hold their bid number. We had to get approval from purchasing department to use that, and then seek approval. And then I didn't want to put any message out until I knew that they had heard from Nevco, the scoreboard company, that they've accepted the drawings as is, approved the submittals, and are actually ordering the scoreboards the way we want them. That didn't come till July 16th. That's when we got that information. At that meeting with Sprint Turf, that's when they said, we may no longer meet the Sprint Turf field schedule of the end of August. We're looking at end of September. And then that's when they said, the running track will have to happen after that, and that depends on good weather. You can't patch and coat the track unless it's 52 degrees day and night. You can't drop it.
But I'm going to go back again because
so
the
on.
meeting, I've been in all these meetings, like in the last, I don't know, month or so. We were still not supposed to get access to the turf field until the end of September, and that is
Correct.
really important for people to understand. But we were supposed to have the track done, we were supposed to have the scoreboards done. That's why we came back and said, can we get it the middle of September and push the track off? That's my understanding, and that is, we weren't going to be on because we could not be on the field even when the turf was finished. As a matter of fact, I had already emailed the first selectman to say, you're going to get complaints about this because parents are going to see turf field that's finished and we're going to be telling them they can't be on it because they were going to be doing the track. And for liability, we can't do the track and have kids out there on the turf field. So we kind of expected we were going to be dealing with that. What we didn't expect was to be pushing the track off, and now we're in the middle of September.
Okay, but, and which I respect that the track got pushed off. Let's get access to the field, and obviously we would love to have a ribbon cutting. Here, everybody take a look, and we're going to be deprived of that. But I'm back on my question, which is, if the turf field was known, it was not going to be ready till the end of September, because at that point, it was part of an entire package where that timeline is still in place, but we're still looking at a second week of August, changing
Yep.
the schedules online,
There are two pieces to that, and that I think I'll answer from our perspective. Number one, we don't ever message if we don't actually know what we're messaging. And when we got into the end of July, and when we found out the concrete person quit, we also wondered about Sprint Turf and how they were managing the whole project, because they have not been a general contractor for a project like this, where they have subcontractors working for them. They have been a subcontractor who comes in and does the turf. So it was not easy for about 2 weeks trying to get them to tell us exactly where we were in the
Exactly.
timeline, what's going on. I think they probably knew they were having concrete issues before we knew it. And we had to work our way up to the owner of the company and let them know how serious it is for us to understand what's happening on the field. So, I think that's part of it. And we feel like in the middle of July, we were still messaging before practices were starting August 10th. And again, that was working with Dave Ebling and Seth. Would have been nice to actually send something out 2 or 3 weeks before, but every time we send something out, we tend to get a lot of emails back. And the last thing we want to do is put something out that's not accurate. We've tried to put out accurate information to everything that we know.
I encourage board members to look at the time. Mrs. Maxon Connolly, do you have a follow-up that you want to do? Because I have Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Gerber,
I'm
and
willing,
Mrs.
I'm happy to defer to Mr. Pearson. I'm still not understanding it's the expected timeline, but it's not, I'll just leave it alone.
Just talking about the deadline, I know it's dangerous probably at this point in the project to talk about a specific date, but until recently, we've been talking most specifically about the 28th.
Yeah.
As the contractual deadline, but you're talking the middle of September. Do we have an expectation that it's going to be completed and ready to play on prior to the 28th? Again, fingers crossed.
Well, and that's a hard question to answer
Fingers
simply because we don't
crossed
want to,
and-
we don't want to overcommit. Could the company get it done for the middle of September? Absolutely. And we are hoping that that is what they will do, and we've been loud and clear to them to tell them that's what we are expecting that they'll do.
and we can't do anything to jeopardize the warranty. So when the contractor finishes the turf field, he's got to get it inspected by the engineers of record. He then has to do what's called a bounce test. This certifies that it's ready for play by students, and then they'll issue the warranty. So all of that's included in their contract. They're geared up to do all of that, but we can't jump onto this field until we have that stuff in our hands so that it's legally
But I will say, we have communicated to them, they should be ready to do the GMEX testing the day the field is done. And we're going to continue, we have another meeting with them tomorrow, and we will reiterate that again.
All right, so we don't need to line up any other municipal authority to do the testing. It's all incorporated.
all in their contract.
Okay.
They do this for a living, so.
Mrs. Gerber.
Well, I guess, and maybe this is already, I think this is what Mrs. Maxon Connelly was saying, but I just wanted to put it out there as well. So my understanding was that last summer, the ward community received an email in July, I believe, of 2017, saying that, that we understand your disappointment that this project has been bumped out because it was supposed to be done last summer, and I understand the reasons why that happened. But that it was that the project was going to start June 1st. It was going to take 90 days. But what I'm hearing now is that at some point it was stated that it was going to actually be September 29th. At what point? Because my understanding is that what was sent to the ward community, the last they heard of this was that memo last July saying start June 1st, 90 days.
Correct.
Then the next time the ward community received any notification on this was that August 10th, I want to say, I believe, email.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to understand, but it sounds like at some point September 29th became the new completion date before August 10th. Maybe even earlier. I'm just trying to get a sense of the timeline, because I think that's in great part the frustration of the ward community was that they received an email a year ago saying 90 days from June 1st. Then the next thing they heard, this is my understanding, I don't have children at ward, was an email on August 10th saying now it's going to be the end of September, but it sounds as if there was some understanding earlier that it was going to be the end of September, but that was not shared with the ward community. So I think that that's part of the frustration on their part, is that going up until August 10th, they thought this field was going to be done by the end of August. But it sounded to me like some people here knew in advance that it was going to be September 29th. So I guess my question is just why wasn't that information shared earlier with the ward community?
So there was probably a 2 or 3 week timeline when the scoreboards was finalized and we were talking about the schedule. They were having trouble with their concrete subcontractor not responding. They wasted 3 weeks
Right, because I
going
know
back
we
and forth
received an
with
email
us.
as a board on July 13th saying all summer projects are all good. And then the next we heard was the beginning of August saying there may be a problem with ward, we'll keep you
Yep,
posted.
that's when we realized we got professionals from their firm involved to say that they are not going to meet that deadline. And it was because of the concrete sub, their electrical sub, and now the steel shop drawings for the scoreboards.
But what I'm going to say, that is not my understanding, in that what they shared with us was because of the scoreboards, because of the still. So they are having issues with their own timeline and within their subs, and most of these contractors will give us a deadline that is worst-case scenario. They don't set a timeline for themselves that's best case. We did not know in the middle of July exactly where we were sitting, and I think we had about a 2 or 3 week period where we were trying to figure it out as well. I actually, Mr. Collins stopped by one day and said, this is the date. I emailed Mr. Fry and Mr. Ebling and to say, I hope you know, this is the date. We need to make sure we're all understanding the timeline. And I think there was a disconnect for 2 or 3 weeks trying to figure out what was happening with the project and understanding what the impact to adding the extra boards and the steel and the size of the boards was doing to the project. But they, as far as their contractual obligation and the change that we made with the scoreboard, they are on time and they are doing what they're contracted to do. Whether we like it or not, we want them to go faster, but that's the reality. And we did not have the information. When I emailed the board July 13th, our projects were on time from our perspective. We didn't know.
Right, but when we talk about the contractual obligation with Sprint Turf, was that September 29th? I'm still, you keep hearing the September 29th date, and am I right? I'm a little confused.
I'm going to tell you what my understanding was, and Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong. We were supposed to get the field, August, at the end of August.
Okay.
However, we weren't going to be able to have kids on it because we had all of that other work. It's a huge project that was going to be done by the end of September. That's my understanding of the project.
That's
So
correct.
we came to the company and said, we want to push the track off because we want to get quicker access. They should be ahead of where they are right now. If you're looking at where they are in their own timeline, we would have expected by the end of September to have the track done as well. So, but we
correct.
were not going to have kids on the field the first week in September, even if we were on the old timeline.
But I think that's part of the confusion and frustration on the ward community is, again, all they received was something
I
a year
understand.
ago saying 90 days, starting
Yep.
June 1st. So just putting it out there that I think that's part of the problem is that, yes, even though we knew the field was going to be done at the end of August, if it wasn't usable, I don't believe that information was shared with the ward
Correct.
community. Hence, they thought.
Yeah, 'cause
in
we didn't have
August,
that
we'd have
either.
our fields.
Yeah, we didn't have that
Seeing as
information.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, 2 years ago,
Yeah.
that did happen with Ludlow. And I understand it was
Yeah.
a different contractor, and that's nothing to do with
Understand.
what this office had to do, because that has to do with purchasing. But I do think that that is an unfortunate juxtaposition, because you have
Agreed.
this project's already been delayed for a year, plus Ludlow was done
Yep,
on
I
time with
understand.
the track. And I get it was a totally different thing in the signs and all that, so just wanted to put that out there.
My sense is that we're going in circles on this conversation. Ms. Jacobson, do you have anything else that you wanted, because you're next on the list?
I just wanted to know that if we're pushing off the track piece of this, are we losing track for spring as well?
No.
So track will be up and running for the track season?
You'll be able to use the track, but it's not going to be repaired or resurfaced.
Okay, you're doing it after season. Okay, and we're providing all transportation for these teams that have been moved to different locations, and we're busing them to
I have
Tomlinson?
not heard
and-
that we need buses to transport any children yet at this point. We're working with
like, if
Park
the
and Rec.
team- huh?
We're working with Park and Rec. I know the athletic director's working with Park and Rec to relocate a lot of fields, even Ludlow High School, to make everything work until we can get this done.
So if a team is relocated for a month and a half somewhere else, they're going to be provided transportation, I would assume,
Well,
correct?
we're not thinking it's going to be a month and a half. We're trying to get the field done by what the contractor said,
I'm going to answer
September
that, though,
28th.
because with our athletic director, if
Hopefully
he came to us
sooner.
and said he needs a bus, we'll give him a bus.
Okay,
So, I mean, so if it's, but I have not had that request. However, we did have somebody that called wanting to know if they could ride that bus all year long, because they thought it was, so I'm thinking there's some kind of athletic bus that's running, because they were going from Ward over to another field. So,
Well, because there's teams going to Tomlinson now
Yeah.
from Ward and Woods, so not all of them drive. You know,
Right.
they're freshmen on varsity or whatever. So I just want to make sure we have the transportation piece
We'll
covered in the interim
support them
period.
with transportation if we need to.
Can I honestly wrap this up, because we owe the public time to come forward? So I'm sure there were other projects that were done,
I was going to start
but
off by saying a
unfortunately-
total of 67. We finished 48 as of
Yes.
Friday, the 24th. Some great highlights, but not a problem.
Yes. You mean all but one project moved forward?
There were
thankfully?
two. There were two that were quite difficult.
So that's still a good track
The rest
record.
are really good, and there's a few emergencies that we took care of.
Okay. Any committee and
Difficult.
liaison reports that are essential to give at the moment? Committee liaison reports? Yes?
PTA Council's having their leadership conference on Friday, September 7th. The Roger Sherman Building Committee is actually meeting tonight, and they are, bids, the RFQing out, bids are coming in, they're finalizing their short list of vendors to invite back to interview tonight, so we should know that information,
The only
tomorrow.
comment I'll make on the Mill Hill project, the building committee chair is going to appear before the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance to ask for some clarification. We've invited him to come to the Board of Education meeting following those two meetings so that we could have a conversation with him. I'll keep you informed of where that stands. Anything else on committee liaison? If none, any open board comment? I see none. Thank you for your patience. Open board public comment on agenda items. Anybody that wishes to come forward, please come forward and state your name and address. While you're coming forward, if you had been here at the beginning of the meeting, you could have spoken at the beginning of the meeting. Some people like to wait, but nonetheless, there are two options. So please come forward and speak. Yeah. So please stand. Well, you're new to the town? Welcome.
My name is Neji Sakli. We're new to the town. We moved from Chicago, so.
Thank you. And so we do limit to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I thank the board members for their questions. They really asked the questions that I wanted to ask. It's mainly about the turf. We had a meeting with the parent meeting the past Sunday, and then we looked at the turf as a barren area. A lot of the parents expressed their frustration, and probably you've been receiving a lot of the emails. One thing, because we don't expect the turf to be completed when the football season or the soccer season is over. Because now most of our kids, we have to drive them to Tomlinson. There are different scheduling that is taking toll on the parents. Also, it's the turf. It's used by, for example, Parks and Rec. They use the turf also. There are a lot of games scheduled in Tomlinson that are not being completed, that are not being done. So, and that's my concern. So I hope that's to receive a definite answer when the turf is going to be completed. That's the
At Ward.
Ward, yes,
Yeah.
Fairfield Ward.
Okay.
And thank you for the questioning. It was really precise. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak? Please come forward, state your name and address.
Jeff O'Connell, 271 Steiner Street, and also about the turf field. And you probably saw me shaking my head quite a bit back there. I have a sophomore at Ward.
Microphone, please. I'm sorry.
Sorry, that's all right.
You're on national TV, international.
I have a sophomore at Ward, and obviously there's a lot of frustration going around. We keep talking about the delivery date of September, whatever. It was, the original delivery date was last year, right? So we seem to skip over that whole mea culpa, right? What happened to that? We also talk about the 90 days from June. Why did we put in a schedule going out to mid to late September, right? Why give them that out, the vendor? Who picked this vendor? If we knew the size and scope and the issues that we had with Ludlow, why would we pick somebody who's never done this before? So just a lot of questions I have about how did we put ourselves in this situation? And again, the communication was the most frustrating thing, right? He said, she said, you guys can point fingers at everybody else. We own this, right? We're the town. We own communicating out to the parents and to the kids, right? We have an obligation to do that. We failed on that desperately. So those are my comments. But going forward, next project, I think we ought to have a better handle on how we're managing that, who we're picking, have they done this before, and don't pick somebody that's the lowest bid, because In business, that never works. Thanks.
Anybody else wish to come forward and speak? Please state your name and address. It would be helpful if you waited until you came up, sat down, so that the microphone would pick you up. So please state your name and address.
Dale Resnick, 258 Steiner Street. I've asked the question before. I just need to know for sure, is the Jennings-McKinley thing off the table? I see it on here that you guys were talking about it, but I just never heard a vote on it. I just need to report back to my school if it's gonna happen, if it's definitely off the table, are you voting on it? Please, I'm like begging you. I cannot take this anymore. I need to know. And the other thing is there any way, instead of having questions at the beginning of the meeting, if you have a pause in the middle? Because I can't come in and ask you this question at the beginning of the meeting because I don't know what you're going to talk about. I don't know if you're going to get to it. But maybe in the middle, you've gotten to it and I can ask the question. Just a thought. And please, I cannot leave here tonight. I cannot let you leave here tonight unless you tell me that it's off the table. I mean it. I'm not leaving. I can't. I cannot leave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So sit down and if you listen, you may get the answer you want. Because we do not respond to public questions, but as a reminder to the board, I'll ask this. We're asking each of you to submit a goal for us to consider. Is there anybody here who's going to submit a goal to look at pairing Jennings and McKinley? Is there anybody here that's going to do that? The answer is no. So therefore, if it's not on our goal sheet to rank, it won't be part of the motion and it won't go forward. Robert's rules say you should not vote negative motions. You're not voting what you're not going to do. You only vote what you're going to do. So the June discussion where we said there's no appetite for it, the August discussion that clarified nobody's going to come forward with that as a goal. And so you should sleep tonight, and board members should tell members of the public to sleep tonight. But I'm addressing the board, not answering the public's question. Anybody else wish to come forward? Okay, please. Please state your name and address.
Yeah, my name is Sylvia Marson Sackley, 19 Collingwood. I am a parent, that's my husband over there. I'm a parent of a freshman football player at Ward. And that was really the issue that I came here to hear about, which is also my frustration that at the beginning when you had I kept waiting, when the facilities gave their report, they didn't mention it, and finally this issue got addressed. That field looks torn up completely. The sacks of 1-ton sacks, 50 sacks sitting there, and the kids having to go all these other fields, right? Please, is the September 28th deadline a real deadline?
Again, we don't address questions from the public, so I'm sorry that I can't answer that question.
So I just want that to be put out there, because that date has been bandied about among with other dates, but now I just realized, since I just moved here, I just realized that there's a longer history to this, that there's a year and 9 months and 90 days and timelines and all the questions that you guys have been talking about timelines. So is that a realistic thing? And then the other question that I had, which is a completely other philosophical question, because I come from Chicago, and I have heard you guys talk about this racial imbalance, and I want to know what that is. What do you mean by that? And it was discussed along with a proposal for a magnet school. So then, is that a way of remedying the so-called racial imbalance? So what's going to happen is the privileged kids are going to go to the magnet school and leave the balance on the other side. So I'm concerned about that. I know it's a can of worms, but put that out there, because for a new person coming in, I don't know what your racial imbalance is. It's a very clinical and kind of, it's a very clinical term. So what does that really mean?
Okay.
And I know you can't answer it probably.
Correct.
But, okay.
But
I
if
just
you
wanted
see
to be
me
out there.
afterwards, I'll
Yeah.
give you some heads up on it.
Okay.
Or
It's very
my phone number is in the book.
aesthetic.
My phone number is on the website, so you should feel free to call me.
Okay.
Or
all
any
right.
board member if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else from the public wish to come forward? Seeing none, with no other items on our agenda. 5, a motion for adjournment. Ms. Pitko, seconded by Ms. Leeper. All in favor, please raise your hand to say aye, and it's unanimous. Thank you very much.